Botchan. Natsume Soseki. Chapter 1. Ever since I was a kid, my recklessness, a trait inherited from my father, has always landed me in trouble. Back in elementary school, I jumped from the second floor and was laid up for a week with a bad back. Some might ask, why such a crazy stunt? No profound reason, really. I was leaning out a second-story window of the newly built school, and a classmate teased me, saying, "Big shot, huh? Bet you can't jump from there. Scaredy cat." And the others egged him on. When the janitor carried me home piggyback, my old man glared at me and said, "Who jumps from a second story and throws out their back?" So I told him, next time, I'll jump without throwing it out. Another time, a relative gave me a Western-style knife. I was showing off the shiny blade to my friends, holding it up to the light, when one of them said, "It's shiny all right, but I bet it doesn't even cut." "Doesn't cut? I'll cut anything," I shot back. "Then cut your finger," he challenged. "A finger? Easy." I sliced the back of my right thumb. Luckily, the knife was small and my thumb bone was tough, so I still have it attached. But the scar will stay with me till I die. 20 paces east of our house, there was a small vegetable garden sloping south, with a chestnut tree in the middle. That chestnut tree was more precious to me than life itself. When the nuts ripened, I'd rush out first thing in the morning, gather any fallen nuts, and eat them at school. The west side of the garden bordered the property of a pawnbroker named Yamashiroya. The pawnbroker had a son, Kantar, about 13 or 14. Kantar was, of course, a wimp. But the wimp had the nerve to climb over our fence and steal my chestnuts. One evening, I hid behind the gate and finally caught him red-handed. Cornered, Kantar charged at me desperately. He was a couple of years older and, though a wimp, he was strong. He rammed his flat head into my chest, and his head somehow slipped into the sleeve of my lined kimono. My arm was pinned, so I flailed wildly. Kantar's head, trapped in my sleeve, swung back and forth. He finally bit my upper arm in desperation. It hurt. I shoved him against the fence, tripped him, and he tumbled head over heels into his own yard, which was about 6 feet lower than ours. Kantar crashed through the fence, landed with a thud, and one of my kimono sleeves ripped off, freeing my arm at last. That night, my mother went over to Yamashiroya to apologize and retrieved my sleeve. I pulled a lot of other pranks too. I remember getting Kanek, the carpenter's son, and Koku, the fishmonger's son, to join me in tearing up Mosaku's carrot patch. The carrots had just sprouted, and the whole patch was covered with straw. The three of us wrestled there for half a day and ended up trampling all the carrots. I also got into hot water for plugging up the well in Furukawa's rice paddy. It was a clever contraption. Water would flow out of a hollowed-out section of thick bamboo buried deep in the ground, irrigating the surrounding rice plants. I didn't understand how it worked back then, so I just jammed rocks and sticks into the opening until the water stopped flowing. I went home for dinner, and Furukawa stormed in, red-faced and furious. I think I had to pay a fine to settle the matter, and my father never showed me any affection. My mother favored my older brother. He was pale and enjoyed playing female roles in amateur theatricals. My father always said, looking at me, "He'll never amount to anything." My mother worried about my future, saying I was too rough and wild. They were right. I never amounted to anything. Look at me now. And their worry about my future wasn't misplaced. I'm barely managing to stay out of prison. A few days before my mother died, I was doing cartwheels in the kitchen and hit my ribs on the corner of the hearth. It hurt like hell. My mother was furious. "I don't want to see your face," she yelled. So I went to stay with relatives. Then came the news that she had passed away. I hadn't expected her to die so quickly. I thought, if I'd known it was so serious, I would have behaved better. When I returned home, my brother accused me of being unfilial and said that it was my fault our mother had died so young. Infuriated, I slapped him and got a severe scolding. After my mother's death, it was just my father, my brother, and me. My old man was idle and his favorite pastime was telling anyone who'd listen, "You're no good. No good at all." I still don't know what I was no good at. He was a strange one. My brother claimed he'd become a businessman and busied himself studying English. He was inherently effeminate and sneaky, so we never got along. We fought about every 10 days. Once, we were playing shogi, and he pulled a dirty trick, stalling and then gloating when I was in a bind. I was so mad I threw my rook piece at his forehead. It split his skin and drew a little blood. My brother told on me, and my old man threatened to disown me. I'd resigned myself to being disowned, when Kyo, our maid of 10 years, intervened. She tearfully pleaded with my father until his anger subsided. Even after that, I wasn't particularly afraid of him. I felt more sorry for Kyo. I'd heard she'd been from a respectable family but had fallen on hard times and was forced to work as a servant. She was an old woman. For some reason, she took a great liking to me. It was strange. My mother had given up on me just 3 days before she died, my father despaired of me all the time, and the neighbors shunned me, the neighborhood delinquent. Yet Kyo treated me with surprising kindness. I'd given up on ever being liked, so I didn't mind being treated like dirt by others. In fact, Kyo's doting made me suspicious. When we were alone in the kitchen, she'd sometimes say, "You have an honest and good heart." I never understood what she meant. I figured, if I had a good heart, others would treat me better. Whenever Kyo said this, I'd tell her I hated flattery. She'd just reply, "That's why you have a good heart," and gaze at me with a delighted expression. She looked as proud as if she'd made me herself. It creeped me out a little. After my mother died, Kyo's affection intensified. Sometimes, childishly, I wondered why she was so fond of me. I was worthless, a lost cause. I felt sorry for her. Yet Kyo continued to dote on me. She'd buy me treats like kintsuba and kubayaki with her own money. On cold nights, she'd secretly prepare buckwheat flour and bring me hot soba broth while I was asleep. She even bought me nabayaki udon sometimes. It wasn't just food. She gave me socks and sandals, pencils, and notebooks. Much later, she even lent me 3 yen. I didn't ask for it. She brought it to my room and said, "I know you're short on cash. Please take this." I refused, of course, but she insisted, so I borrowed it. I was secretly thrilled. I put the 3 yen in my wallet and went to the outhouse. The wallet slipped out of my pocket and plopped into the toilet. I sheepishly went back and told Kyo what happened. She immediately found a bamboo stick and said, "I'll get it for you." I heard splashing from the well. She'd hooked the wallet string with the stick and was washing it. She opened it, checked the 1 yen bill, which was now brown and faded. She dried it over the brazier and said, "There, good as new." I sniffed it. "It stinks," I said. "Give it here then," she said. "I'll exchange it for you." Somehow or other, she swapped the bill for 3 silver coins. I've forgotten what I used the money for. I told her I'd pay her back, but I never did. Now, even if I wanted to repay her tenfold, I can't. Kyo always gave me things when my father and brother weren't around. I hated being secretive, especially when it came to personal gain. Even though I didn't get along with my brother, I didn't like receiving sweets and colored pencils from Kyo behind his back. "Why do you give things only to me? Why not my brother?" I asked her. Kyo, ever composed, would reply, "Your brother gets things from your father, so it's all right." That wasn't fair. My old man was stubborn, but he wasn't biased. But that's how it must have seemed to Kyo. She was clearly blinded by affection. What could I expect from an uneducated old woman, even if she'd come from a good family? And there was more. Favoritism is a scary thing. Kyo was convinced that I would rise in the world and become a great man. Meanwhile, she decided my studie's brother, with his pale complexion, would never amount to anything. There was no arguing with her. She was certain that the people she liked were destined for greatness and the people she disliked would surely fail. At that time, I had no particular ambitions. But since Kyo insisted I'd become something, I assumed I probably would. It seems ridiculous now. I even asked Kyo once what I would become. She didn't seem to have anything specific in mind. Just that I would ride in a rickshaw, build a house with a grand entrance, and that sort of thing. Kyo also planned to live with me once I had my own house and got married. "Please take me with you," she begged me repeatedly. I started to believe I might actually have my own house someday, so I told her, "Sure, I'll take you." She had a vivid imagination and started making plans. "Where would you like to live?" "Kimachi. Azabu. We'll put a swing in the garden." One Western-style room will be enough. At that time, I didn't care about owning a house. I didn't need a Western-style or a Japanese-style house. I don't need any of that, I told Kyo. You're so modest and pure of heart, she praised me. Kyo praised me for everything. This was how things were for 5 or 6 years after my mother died. My father scolded me. I fought with my brother. Kyo gave me treats and constantly praised me. I had no other desires. I thought this was enough. I figured most kids lived like this. Except Kyo kept saying, "You poor thing, you're so unfortunate," so often that I started to believe it. Otherwise, I wasn't bothered by anything. Except maybe the fact that my father never gave me any allowance. 6 years after my mother died, my father passed away from a stroke. That April, I graduated from a private middle school. In June, my brother graduated from business school. He'd found a position at a company's branch office in Kyushu and had to move. He said he'd sell the house, settle our affairs, and leave for his new post. Whatever, I said. I didn't plan on relying on him. Even if he took care of me, we'd just fight, and he'd eventually kick me out. I'd rather not be beholden to him just for his meager support. I figured I could make a living delivering milk. My brother called a second-hand dealer and sold off our family heirlooms for next to nothing. The house and land went to some wealthy guy through a broker. He must have made a killing, but I don't know the details. A month earlier, I'd moved into a small 4.5-mat room in Ogawamachi, Kanda, to prepare for my uncertain future. Kyo was heartbroken to see our family home, where she'd lived for so long, sold to a stranger, but it wasn't hers to keep. "If only you were a bit older, you could inherit this place," she lamented. "If being older entitled me to inherit it, I should be able to inherit it now." She clearly had no clue that the house would go to my brother. That's how my brother and I parted ways. The tricky part was what to do about Kyo. My brother obviously couldn't take her, and Kyo had no intention of following him to the backwoods of Kyushu. Meanwhile, I was stuck in my cramped lodgings, ready to move out at any moment. I asked Kyo if she wanted to find another position. "Until you have your own home and a wife," she replied, "I suppose I'll have to impose on my nephew." Her nephew was a court clerk and lived comfortably. He'd invited Kyo to live with him a few times, but she preferred our familiar home, even if it meant being a servant. Now, however, living with her nephew seemed better than starting over at a strange new place. Still, she kept going on about how I needed to get a house and a wife so she could come and take care of me. She seemed to prefer me, a stranger, over her own nephew. 2 days before he left for Kyushu, my brother came to my lodgings and gave me 600 yen. "Use this as capital for a business, or for your studies, whatever you want. I won't interfere after this," he said. That was surprisingly decent of him. I didn't need his 600 yen, but I liked his hands-off approach, so I thanked him and took the money. He then gave me another 50 yen. "Give this to Kyo," he said. I did so without comment. We parted at Shimbashi Station 2 days later, and I haven't seen him since. I lay awake pondering what to do with the 600 yen. Starting a business sounded like a hassle, and I didn't think I could do much with 600 yen anyway. Even if I could, I lacked the credentials to impress anyone, so it would probably just end in failure. I decided to forget about starting a business and use the money for my studies. 200 yen a year for 3 years. I figured I could achieve something if I studied hard for 3 years. Then I had to decide which school to attend. I'd never liked studying, especially languages and literature. Modern poetry was completely beyond me. I couldn't understand a single line in a 20-line poem. I figured, if I had to study something I hated, it didn't matter what it was. As luck would have it, I passed the physics school and saw a recruitment poster. Figuring it was fate, I picked up an application and enrolled on the spot. Looking back, it was a rash decision, fueled by my inherited recklessness. I spent 3 years studying like everyone else. I wasn't particularly bright, so my ranking was consistently closer to the bottom. But somehow, 3 years passed, and I graduated. I was surprised myself, but there wasn't much I could complain about, so I accepted my diploma quietly. 8 days after graduation, the principal summoned me. Wondering what he wanted, I went to his office. He told me there was an opening for a math teacher at a middle school somewhere in Shikoku. The salary was 40 yen a month. What do you say? He asked. I had no intention of becoming a teacher or moving to the countryside. But I had no other prospects either. So I immediately agreed. Another impulsive decision, courtesy of my father's recklessness. Having accepted the offer, I had to prepare for my new post. For the past 3 years, I'd been holed up in my little room, without a single scolding or fight. It was a relatively peaceful period in my life. But now, I had to leave my 4.5-mat sanctuary. The only time I'd ever left Tokyo was for a school trip to Kamakura with my classmates. This was no Kamakura. This was far, far away. On the map, it was a tiny dot on the coast. I doubted it was much of a place. I had no idea what kind of town it was or what kind of people lived there. Not that it mattered. I was going, regardless. It was all a bit of a bother. After I moved out, I still visited Kyo occasionally. Her nephew turned out to be a pretty good guy. He always welcomed me and treated me well. Kyo would brag about me to him. She even told him that I'd graduate, buy a house in Kimachi, and work for the government. She was making things up as she went along, and I'd just sit there, embarrassed, my face burning red. It happened more than once. She'd even bring up embarrassing childhood stories, like the time I wet the bed. I don't know what her nephew thought of her boasting. Kyo, being old-fashioned, saw our relationship as a master-servant dynamic, like in feudal times. She seemed to think I'd make a fine master for her nephew. He was a good sport about it. 3 days before my departure, I visited Kyo and found her lying in bed in the north-facing 6-mat room, nursing a cold. The moment she saw me, she sat up and asked, "Botchan, when are you getting your own house?" She seemed to think money would magically appear in my pockets after graduation. And she still called me Botchan, which seemed even more ridiculous now. "I won't be getting a house anytime soon," I told her. "I'm going to the countryside." She looked utterly disappointed and smoothed her salt and pepper hair. I felt bad for her, so I said, "I'll be back. I'll definitely be back next summer for vacation." She still looked distraught, so I asked, "What do you want me to bring you back as a souvenir?" "Soseki from Ekigo," she said. I'd never heard of Soseki from Ekigo. Besides, it was in the wrong direction. "I don't think they have Soseki where I'm going," I told her. "Which way are you headed?" she asked. "West," I said. "Beyond or before her cone?" she pressed. This was going nowhere. On the day of my departure, Kyo came early and fussed over me. She packed toothpaste, toothpicks, and a hand towel she'd bought at a small shop on the way into my canvas bag. I told her I didn't need them, but she wouldn't listen. At the station, after I'd boarded the train, she looked at me intently and said softly, "This may be our last goodbye. Take care of yourself." Her eyes were filled with tears. I didn't cry, but I came close. After the train had moved quite a distance, I looked back out the window. She was still there, a tiny figure on the platform. Chapter 2. The steamship blew its whistle and came to a stop. A small barge pulled away from the shore and rowed towards us. The boatman was stark naked except for a red loincloth. What a barbaric place. Though, in this heat, I could hardly blame him. The sun was so intense, the water glittered blindingly. I asked the clerk and he confirmed that this was where I disembarked. The place looked like a fishing village, about the size of Mori. They've got to be kidding, I thought. There's no way I can stand living in a place like this. But I had no choice. I jumped onto the barge, followed by 5 or 6 other passengers. They loaded 4 large boxes onto the barge, and the boatman, still in his loincloth, rowed back to shore. I was the first one to jump off when we reached land. I grabbed a snot-nosed kid standing on the beach and asked, "Where's the middle school?" The kid just stared blankly and said, "Dunno." What a clueless hick. The town was the size of a postage stamp, and he didn't know where the middle school was. Then a man in a strange uniform came up to me and said, "Come with me." He led me to an inn called Minatoya. A group of women greeted me in unison, "Welcome." I suddenly didn't feel like going in. Standing in the doorway, I demanded to know where the middle school was. They told me it was another 2 RI away by train, and I definitely didn't want to go in. I grabbed my 2 canvas bags from the uniformed man and walked off. The people at the inn looked puzzled. I found the station easily enough and bought a ticket without any trouble. The train was tiny, like a matchbox. It rattled along for about 5 minutes and then stopped. This was my stop. No wonder the ticket was so cheap, it only cost 3 sen. I hired a rickshaw to the middle school, but classes were over, and the building was empty. The janitor told me the teacher on duty had stepped out on an errand. Pretty casual, I thought. I considered looking for the principal, but I was exhausted. Take me to the inn, I told the rickshaw man. He pulled up to a place called Yamashiroya. The name was the same as the pawnbroker's shop back home, which I found amusing. They showed me to a dark room on the 2nd floor, at the bottom of the stairs. It was stifling. I don't want this room. It's too hot, I complained. I'm afraid all the other rooms are taken, the innkeeper said, dumping my bags and leaving. I had no choice but to go in and sweat it out. Eventually, they told me the bath was ready, so I hopped in and quickly hopped out. On my way back, I noticed several empty rooms that looked cool and inviting. What a nerve. Lying right to my face. I ate dinner and went straight to bed, but I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the heat. The inn was noisy, 5 times louder than my lodgings back in Tokyo. I drifted off and dreamed of Kyo. She was munching on soseki from Ekigo, bamboo leaves and all. Bamboo leaves are poisonous, you shouldn't eat them, I told her. But these leaves are medicinal, she replied, continuing to eat with gusto. I started laughing, ha 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 ha, and then I woke up. The maid was opening the shutters. The sky was still a brilliant, cloudless blue. I'd heard that you're supposed to tip when traveling. If you don't, you'll be treated poorly. That must be why they stuck me in this cramped, dark room. They probably judged me by my shabby clothes, my canvas bags, and my silk umbrella. Those country bumpkins. Judging a book by its cover. I'll show them. I'd brought 30 yen left over from my tuition money. After travel expenses and incidentals, I still had about 14 yen. I'd be getting a salary soon, so I could afford to be generous. These cheapskates would probably faint if I gave them a 5 yen tip. Just wait and see. I washed my face, feeling smug, and waited in my room. The same maid from last night brought me breakfast. She was grinning ear to ear. How rude. As if her face was anything to smile about. Mine was much better, thank you very much. I'd planned to wait until after breakfast, but her grin annoyed me. I pulled out a 5 yen note and said, "Take this to the front desk later." The maid looked at me strangely. After breakfast, I headed straight to the school. I hadn't bothered to polish my shoes. I knew the general location of the school from my rickshaw ride yesterday. After a few turns, I found myself at the gate. The path to the entrance was paved with granite. Yesterday, when the rickshaw rattled over these stones, the noise was deafening. It was a little unsettling. I passed a bunch of students in Kokura Middle School uniforms heading through the gate. Some were taller and tougher looking than me. The thought of teaching these guys made me uneasy. I presented my card and was led to the principal's office. The principal was a dark-skinned man with a thin mustache and big eyes, like a raccoon. He was putting on airs. "Well, apply yourself diligently," he said pompously, handing me my official appointment letter with a grand flourish and a large seal. I tossed that letter into the ocean on my way back to Tokyo. "You'll need to show this letter to each staff member," he instructed. What a waste of time. It would be easier to post the thing on the staff room wall for 3 days. The teachers wouldn't be in the staff room until the first period bell. I had some time to kill. The principal checked his watch and said, "We'll talk more later, but I'd like you to understand the general principles." He then launched into a long lecture on the spirit of education. I half-heartedly listened, but halfway through, I realized I'd landed in a strange place. There was no way I could live up to his expectations. He was expecting me, a reckless idiot, to be a role model for the students, a paragon of virtue for the whole school, and to exert a moral influence beyond academics. What kind of saint would come all the way to this backwater for 40 yen a month? People are all pretty much the same. Anyone would get into a fight if they were provoked. But judging from this lecture, I wouldn't be able to say boo to a goose, let alone take a walk. If the job was this demanding, he should have told me beforehand. I hated lying, so I decided to be honest, refuse the position, and go back home. After that 5 yen tip, I only had about 9 yen left. Not enough for a ticket back to Tokyo. I should have kept my money. Still, 9 yen was better than nothing. Better to be broke than a liar. I was about to tell him, I can't possibly do what you're asking. I'm returning this letter, when the principal blinked his raccoon eyes at me and said, that's just an ideal. I know you can't live up to it, so don't worry, and he chuckled. If he knew that, why bother with the intimidation? Just then, the bell rang. The classrooms erupted in noise. The teachers should be in the staff room now, the principal said, leading me there. It was a long, narrow room with desks lining the walls. All the teachers turned to look at me as I entered. I felt like a zoo animal. As instructed, I went to each teacher, presented my appointment letter, and introduced myself. Most simply nodded and bowed from their chairs, but the more conscientious ones actually took the letter, looked it over, and returned it respectfully. It was like a scene from a play. By the time I got to the 15th teacher, the gymnastics instructor, I was getting impatient. They only had to do it once. I had to repeat the same charade 15 times. Have some consideration. Among the teachers was the vice principal, whose name I've forgotten. He held a literature degree. A literature degree meant he was a university graduate, so he must have been a big shot. He spoke in a strangely soft, effeminate voice. What surprised me most was that he was wearing a flannel shirt in this heat. It might have been lightweight flannel, but it had to be scorching. Only a literature graduate would endure such an outfit. And it was red. He looked ridiculous. I later learned he wore a red shirt every single day. He claimed it was for health reasons, that red was medicinal. I didn't buy it. If that were true, he should wear red pants and a red hakama too. Then there was the English teacher, Koga, a pale, sickly-looking man. Usually, pale people are thin, but Koga was pale and puffy. He reminded me of Osei's father, a farmer from my elementary school days. I asked Kyo once why Osei's father was so pale and puffy. It's not because he's a farmer, she'd explained. It's because he eats nothing but unripe eggplants. Since then, whenever I see a pale, puffy person, I assume they have a diet of unripe eggplants. This English teacher must have been eating them too. Though I still don't know what unripe really means. I asked Kyo once, but she just laughed and didn't answer. I suppose she didn't know either. Then there was Hotta, the other math teacher. He had a thick, bristly crew cut and the fierce face of a mountain monk. When I politely showed him my appointment letter, he didn't even look at it. So, you're the new guy? Come visit me sometime. Ahahaha. He boomed. What's with the ahahaha? Who'd want to visit such a rude lout? I immediately nicknamed him Red Tornado. The Chinese classics teacher was, as expected, a stern fellow. You must be tired from your journey yesterday, and you're already starting classes today. You must be working very hard, he droned on and on. He was a kindly old man. The art teacher looked every bit the artist, with his flashy shirahari and his fan fluttering about. Where are you from? He asked. Tokyo, I replied. Fantastic. A fellow Tokyoite. I'm a Tokyoite myself, you know. If he was a Tokyoite, I didn't want to be one. I could write volumes about each teacher, but I'll spare you the details. Once the introductions were over, the principal dismissed me. You can go now, but be sure to discuss your teaching schedule with the head of the mathematics department. You can start teaching the day after tomorrow. I asked who the head of mathematics was. It was Red Tornado. Darn it. I thought, disappointed. I have to work under that guy. Red Tornado said, where are you staying? Yamashiroya? All right, I'll go over there later and we'll talk. He left for class with a piece of chalk in hand. He was the head of the department, so he should have summoned me, not the other way around. Still, I preferred this to being summoned. I wanted to go straight back to the inn, but there was nothing to do there, so I decided to explore the town. I saw the prefectural office, a relic from the previous century. The barracks, which weren't as impressive as the regiment in Azabu. The main street, half the width of Kagurazaka and not nearly as charming. What a dump. A castle town of 250,000 koku, and they acted so proud. I felt sorry for them. Lost in my thoughts, I found myself back at Yamashiroya. The town was smaller than I thought. I'd probably seen most of it by now. I went in, ready for lunch. The innkeeper's wife saw me and rushed out, bowing deeply, her forehead almost touching the floor. "Welcome back," she exclaimed. I took off my shoes and stepped inside. "We have a room available now," the maid said, leading me upstairs. It was a 15-mat room on the second floor, with a large alcove and an adjoining room. I'd never been in such a grand room. Who knew when I'd be in one again? I stripped down to my yukata, lay spread eagle in the middle of the room, and relished the moment. After lunch, I wrote a letter to Kyo. I hated writing letters. I was terrible at it, and my handwriting was atrocious. Besides, I had nothing to write about. Still, Kyo was probably worried, imagining me shipwrecked or dead, so I made an effort and wrote a long letter. It went something like this. Arrived yesterday. Boring place. Sleeping in a 15-mat room. Gave the inn 5 yen as a tip. The innkeeper's wife bowed to the floor. Couldn't sleep last night. Had a dream about you eating sosoreami, bamboo leaves and all. Coming back next summer. Went to school today and gave everyone nicknames. Principal is Raccoon, vice principal is Red Shirt, English teacher is Unripe, math teacher is Red Tornado, art teacher is No Good. We'll write more later. Goodbye. After writing the letter, I felt sleepy, so I stretched out again in the middle of the room. This time I slept soundly, without any dreams. I woke up to the sound of the maid opening the shutters. The sky was the same brilliant blue as yesterday. I'd heard you're supposed to give tea money when you move into a new place. If you don't, you'll be treated badly. That's probably why they stuck me in that cramped, dark room. They probably thought I was a nobody, with my shabby clothes, canvas bags, and silk umbrella. Those country bumpkins look down on everyone. I'll show them. I still had 9 yen left. It didn't matter. I'd be getting paid soon. 5 yen should be enough to make their jaws drop. Just wait and see. I washed my face, feeling pleased with myself, and waited. The same maid from last night brought in my lunch. She was smirking. The nerve. As if I was any less than her. I'd planned to wait until after lunch, but her smirk irritated me. I gave her another 5 yen note and said, "Take this to the front desk later." She looked at me as if I was crazy. After lunch, I headed to the school. I still hadn't polished my shoes. Chapter 3. I finally started teaching. The first time I stood at the lectern, looking down at the students, I felt strange. As I lectured, I wondered if I could actually pull this off. The students were noisy. Every now and then, someone would shout "teacher" in an exaggerated voice. I responded. I'd called my own teachers teacher countless times at the physics school, but being called teacher myself was entirely different. It gave me the creeps. I wasn't a coward, but I wasn't exactly fearless either. Every time someone shouted teacher, it was like hearing the noon gun in Marinauchi on an empty stomach. I somehow muddled through the first period. No one asked any difficult questions. When I returned to the staff room, Red Tornado asked, "How'd it go?" "Fine," I replied curtly. He seemed relieved. When I left the staff room with a piece of chalk for the second period, I felt like I was marching into enemy territory. The students in this class were even bigger than the last. Being a small-framed Tokyoite, I didn't have much of a commanding presence. I could take on a sumo wrestler in a fight, but I wasn't sure how to control 40 brutes with nothing but my voice. I knew I couldn't show any weakness to these country bumpkins, or they'd walk all over me. So I spoke loudly, affecting a slight drawl. At first, the students were intimidated and listened quietly. "See," I thought, feeling emboldened. I started using more Edo dialect, when suddenly the biggest, toughest-looking kid in the front row stood up and said, "Teacher, here we go," I thought, bracing myself. "It's a bit too fast. Could you slow down a tad, will ya?" he drawled. "Slow down a tad, will ya?" What a ridiculous way to talk. I'll slow down if it's too fast, but I'm a Tokyoite and I don't speak your dialect. If you can't understand, just wait until you do, I retorted. Despite this little hiccup, the second period went better than expected. Except for one student who, as I was leaving, cornered me with an impossible geometry problem, asking me to explain it. I broke out in a cold sweat. "I don't know. I'll tell you next time," I said, hurrying away. The students roared with laughter. Someone shouted, "He can't do it. He can't do it. The nerve. Of course, I can't do it. It's not like teachers are supposed to know everything. If I could solve that problem, I wouldn't be stuck in this backwater for 40 yen a month." Back in the staff room, Red Tornado asked, "How'd it go this time?" "Fine," I replied. But that wasn't enough. "These students are clueless," I added. Red Tornado gave me a strange look. The third, fourth, and fifth periods were much the same. I messed up every class that first day. Teaching wasn't as easy as it looked. Classes were over, but I couldn't leave yet. I had to stay until 3 o'clock. Apparently, the students would clean their classrooms and then report to their homeroom teacher for inspection. After checking the attendance book, I was finally free to go. Even if I was being paid, they couldn't expect me to stay at school all day just staring at my desk. It was ridiculous. But all the other teachers were calmly following the rules, so I didn't want to cause a fuss as the newcomer. As I was leaving, I said to Red Tornado, "It's ridiculous to make everyone stay at school until past 3. "You're telling me?" "Ahahaha," he laughed. Then, his expression turning serious, he warned, "Don't complain about the school so much. If you have to complain, complain to me. There are some strange people around here." We parted ways at the intersection, so I didn't have a chance to press him for details. When I got back to the inn, the innkeeper greeted me. "Let me make you some tea," he offered. I thought he meant he was offering me tea, but he made himself some tea and drank it in front of me. He probably helped himself to my tea whenever I was out. "I'm an art and antique enthusiast," he explained. "I recently started dealing them on the side. You seem like a man of refined taste. Perhaps you'd be interested in acquiring some?" What a ridiculous proposition. 2 years ago, someone mistook me for a locksmith at the Imperial Hotel. When I wore a cap to see the Great Buddha in Kamakura, the rickshaw man called me boss. I'd been underestimated many times, but never mistaken for a man of refined taste. It's usually pretty obvious. A man of refined taste would be carrying a scroll or wearing a traditional cap. This guy must have been a con artist. "I'm not interested in those leisurely pursuits of retired gentlemen," I told him. He chuckled, pouring himself another cup. "No one's interested at first, but once you get started, it's hard to stop." He sipped his tea with exaggerated gestures. I'd actually asked him to buy me some tea last night, but this bitter, strong tea wasn't my cup of tea. It upset my stomach. "Next time, buy something milder," I told him. "Certainly," he replied, pouring himself another cup. The nerve of this guy, drinking all my tea. After the innkeeper left, I reviewed the next day's lessons and went straight to bed from then on. Every day was the same. I went to school, followed the rules, and taught my classes. Every day, when I got back to the inn, the innkeeper greeted me with, "Let me make you some tea." I might have tolerated his tea drinking, but he started bringing me other things. First, it was a collection of seals. 10 of these for only 3 yen. "A steal," he urged. "I'm not some itinerant artist," I said. "I don't need seals." Then he brought a hanging scroll with a painting of birds and flowers by an artist called Kazan or something. He hung it in the alcove himself. "Isn't it exquisite?" he asked. "Sure," I replied non-committally. "There are 2 Kazans," he explained. "One is so-and-so Kazan, and the other is Watchamamaklit Kazan. This one is by so-and-so Kazan." He gave me a long, pointless lecture, then tried to sell it to me for 15 yen. "I don't have the money," I told him. "Money is no object," he insisted. "I don't want it even if I have the money," I said, and finally got rid of him. Next, he brought an enormous inkstone, the size of a roof tile. "This is a Duan inkstone. A Duan inkstone." He kept repeating Duan inkstone so many times, I asked him, just to humor him, "What's a Duan inkstone?" He launched into another lecture. There are 3 grades of Duan inkstones: superior, medium, and inferior. Most inkstones these days are superior grade, but this one is a genuine medium grade. Look at these markings. 3 markings. Extremely rare. And the ink dispersion is superb. Try it. He thrust the massive inkstone at me. How much? I asked. The owner brought it back from China and is eager to sell. I can let you have it for 30 yen. This guy was clearly insane. I was managing to keep my job at the school, but at this rate, the antique torture would drive me out of this inn. Then I started to hate the school too. One evening, I was walking through the Machi district when I saw a sign that read soba, with Tokyo written underneath. I loved soba. Back in Tokyo, whenever I passed a soba shop and smelled the broth, I couldn't resist going in. Until now, math and antiques had kept my mind off soba, but seeing that sign, I couldn't just walk past. I went in, ready for a bowl. The place wasn't nearly as nice as the sign suggested. If they were going to advertise Tokyo, they should at least try to make it look decent. The tatami mats were discolored and gritty with sand. The walls were black with soot. The low ceiling was stained with lamp oil smoke, forcing me to duck. The only thing new was the brightly colored menu plastered on the wall, listing the names of various soba dishes. The first item was tempura soba. Hey! Tempura soba! I shouted. 3 guys huddled in a corner, slurping their noodles, looked up. The room was dim, so I hadn't noticed them at first, but now I realized they were my students. Since they'd seen my face, I greeted them. It was my first soba in a while, and it was delicious. I ate 4 bowls of tempura soba the next day. I walked into the classroom, completely oblivious. Written across the blackboard in giant letters was tempura teacher. The students burst into laughter. What's so funny about eating tempura? I asked. 4 bowls is a bit much, Don Chacha think. One of them replied. I can eat 4 bowls, 5 bowls, as many bowls as I want. It's my money. I finished my lecture and went back to the staff room. When I went to the next class, written on the blackboard was, 1 tempura, 4 bowls, but no laughing. I hadn't been bothered before, but now I was annoyed. A joke is a joke, but this was going too far. It wasn't funny, and no one was impressed. These country bumpkins had no sense of humor. They probably thought they could push me around because I was from Tokyo. They lived in a tiny town with nothing to do, so they treated the tempura incident like it was the Russo-Japanese War. Pathetic. I might have laughed along with them if it was a genuine joke, but this was mean-spirited. These kids were devious. Is this supposed to be funny? I asked, wiping the blackboard clean. This kind of cowardly prank is pathetic. Do you even know what cowardly means? Getting mad because people laugh at you is cowardly, Don Chacha think. One of them retorted. What a jerk. I couldn't believe I came all the way to Tokyo to teach these kids. It was depressing. Just study and keep your smart aleck remarks to yourself, I said, and started the lesson. When I went to the next class, written on the blackboard was, eating tempura makes you a smart aleck. This was getting out of hand. I was so annoyed, I told them, I'm not teaching such impertinent brats, and stormed out. The students were delighted to get a free period. At this point, even the antique torture seemed preferable after a good night's sleep. The tempura soba incident didn't bother me as much. I went to school, and the students were there too. I couldn't figure them out. Things were quiet for 3 days. Then, on the 4th evening, I went to Sumida and ate some dango. Sumida was a hot spring town, a 10-minute train ride or a 30-minute walk from the castle town. There were restaurants, hot spring inns, a park, and even a red light district. The dango shop I went to was at the entrance to the red light district and was known for its delicious dango. I stopped by for a snack on my way back from the hot springs. I didn't see any students, so I figured no one would know. The next day, I walked into my first period class and found 2 plates of dango, 7 sen written on the blackboard. I had, in fact, eaten 2 plates of dango and paid 7 sen. These kids were relentless. I figured there would be something in the second period classroom as well. Sure enough, written on the blackboard was, Sumida dango is delicious. Delicious. Unbelievable. I thought the dango incident would be the end of it, but then came the red towel nickname. It was a ridiculous story. Since arriving, I'd made it a habit to visit the Sumida hot springs every day. Everything else in this town was inferior to Tokyo, but the hot springs were top-notch. I figured, since I was here, I might as well enjoy them. I'd go for a walk before dinner and soak in the hot springs. I always carried a large Western-style towel. The towel, soaked in hot spring water, had red stripes that bled, making it look reddish. I carried it with me everywhere, to and from the hot springs, on the train, on my walks. That's why the students started calling me Red Towel. Small towns were suffocating. And there was more. The hot springs were in a new 3-story building. For 8 sen, you could get a private bath with running water in the first-class section. A woman would even bring you tea in a temaku cup. I always went first class. The students started gossiping about how extravagant it was for a 40 yen a month teacher to use the first-class baths every day. None of their business. And there was more. The bath itself was made of granite slabs, about the size of a 15-mat room. There were usually 13 or 14 people soaking in the bath, but sometimes it was empty. It was quite enjoyable to swim in the deep bath, which came up to my chest. I made a habit of swimming laps whenever it was empty. One day, I came down from the 3rd floor, eager for my swim, and peeked into the bathhouse. A large sign, written in bold black ink, was posted on the wall: "No swimming in the bath." Since not many people swim in the bath, I assumed the sign was made specifically for me. I gave up on swimming. But when I got to school, I found "No swimming in the bath" written on the blackboard. It seemed like the entire student body was spying on me. It was infuriating. It wasn't like I'd change my ways just because some students told me to, but it made me question why I came to this stifling, nosy little town. When I got back to the inn, the antique torture continued. Chapter 4. The school had a duty roster, and the teachers took turns staying overnight. Raccoon and Red Shirt were exempt. I asked why those two were exempt from this basic duty. They're treated as senior officials, I was told. That's ridiculous. They get paid more, work less, and now they skip overnight duty. What kind of unfair system is this? They acted as if their arbitrary rules were perfectly normal. I complained about it to Red Tornado. "No matter how much you complain, it's not going to change anything," he said. "If enough people complain, it should change something." Red Tornado quoted some English phrase, "Might is right," but I didn't understand, so he explained it meant the right of the strongest. I already knew about the right of the strongest. I didn't need Red Tornado to explain it to me. Besides, the right of the strongest had nothing to do with overnight duty. Who decided Raccoon and Red Shirt were the strongest anyway? It was a moot point because my turn for overnight duty finally came. I was a light sleeper and needed my own bedding to sleep properly. I rarely slept over at friends' houses when I was a kid. If I hated sleeping at friends' houses, I hated overnight duty at school even more. But I was stuck with it, so I decided to grin and bear it. It was incredibly dull being alone in the school after everyone had left. The duty room was a small room at the west end of the dormitory, behind the classrooms. I peeked inside. The afternoon sun beat down on the room, making it unbearably hot. This countryside stayed hot even into autumn. I ordered the students' dinner and ate it, but it was awful. How could anyone eat that slop? And they finished eating by 4:30. They must have been starving. I finished dinner, but it was still too early to sleep. I felt like going to the hot springs. I wasn't sure if leaving the school during overnight duty was allowed, but I couldn't stand being cooped up like a prisoner. I told the janitor I was stepping out. "Is there something you need?" he asked. "No, I'm going to the hot springs," I replied, and left. I'd forgotten my red towel at the inn, but I figured I could borrow one at the hot springs. I enjoyed the hot springs, and by the time I left, it was almost dusk. I took the train to Komachi Station. The school was a 10-minute walk from there. As I walked, I ran into Raccoon. He must have been planning to take the same train to the hot springs. He was walking briskly, but he noticed me and stopped to say hello. "Aren't you on overnight duty tonight?" he asked. He'd thanked me for my service just 2 hours ago. Principals had a way with words. I was annoyed. "Yes, I'm on overnight duty. And since I'm on duty, I'll be staying at the school tonight," I said pointedly, and walked on. At the Tatamachi intersection, I ran into Red Tornado. This town was too small. I ran into someone every time I went out. "Hey, aren't you on overnight duty?" he asked. "Yeah," I replied. "Isn't it a bit irresponsible to wander around when you're on duty?" he said. "Not at all. It's more irresponsible to stay cooped up all night." I tried to sound confident. "You're too carefree. What if you run into the principal or the vice principal? It'll be a problem." Red Tornado was unusually concerned. "I just ran into the principal," I lied. He said a walk was a good idea when it's hot. He praised me for taking a walk. I didn't want to argue, so I headed back to the school. It got dark quickly. I called the janitor to my room and chatted with him for a couple of hours. Then, I decided to go to bed, even if I couldn't sleep. I changed into my pajamas, pulled back the mosquito net, tossed aside the red blanket, and plopped down on the futon. Plopping down on the futon was a habit from childhood. When I lived in Ogawamachi, the law student in the room below me complained about the noise. Law students were always complaining about something. "It's not my fault the building is poorly constructed," I told him. "If you have a problem, take it up with the landlord." The duty room wasn't on the second floor, so I could plop down as hard as I liked. In fact, the harder I plopped, the better I slept. I stretched out my legs comfortably, and then something jumped on my feet. It was rough, but not like a flea. I shook my legs inside the blanket. The rough things multiplied. They were crawling all over my shins and thighs. I squished one under my butt. Another jumped up to my navel. I was thoroughly freaked out. I sat up and threw the blanket back. 50 or 60 grasshoppers jumped out from under the futon. I'd been creeped out at first, but now I was just mad. "You little pest. I'll show you." I grabbed my pillow and started swatting at them, but they were too small. My swings were powerful, but ineffective. I sat back down on the futon and started beating the area around me like I was beating a rolled-up tatami mat with a dustpan brush. The grasshoppers, startled by the commotion, jumped everywhere, landing on my shoulders, head, and even my nose. I couldn't swat the ones on my face with the pillow, so I had to grab them with my hands and fling them away. But they just landed on the mosquito net, unharmed. It was infuriating. After about 30 minutes, I finally eliminated all the grasshoppers. I got a broom and swept up the carcasses. The janitor came in. "What's going on?" he asked. "What's going on? Who keeps grasshoppers in their futon?" I yelled. "It wasn't me," he said defensively. "Of course, it wasn't you." I threw the broom onto the veranda. The janitor timidly picked it up and left. I summoned 3 student representatives. 6 showed up. 6, 10, it didn't matter. I sat cross-legged in my pajamas, rolled up my sleeves, and began my interrogation. "Why did you put grasshoppers in my futon?" "Grasshoppers? What grasshoppers?" the first one said. "What a brazen liar. These kids used twisted language just like the principal. You don't know what grasshoppers are?" "I'll show you," I said, but I'd already swept them all up. I called the janitor. "Bring me the grasshoppers," I ordered. I threw them in the garbage pit. "Should I retrieve them?" he asked. "Yes. Now." The janitor hurried off and returned with about 10 grasshoppers on a piece of paper. "I'm so sorry, but it's dark, so this is all I could find. I'll find more tomorrow." Even the janitor was an idiot. I showed the students a grasshopper. "This is a grasshopper. You don't know what a grasshopper is? What's wrong with you?" The chubby kid on the left said, "That's a locust, innit?" He was trying to correct me, the little punk. "Locust, grasshopper, it's the same thing. And don't use innit with me. You only eat seasoned rice with miso at festivals." I snapped back. "Innit and seasoned rice are different things, innit?" he replied. He wouldn't give up on their innit. "Locust or grasshopper, why did you put them in my futon? Did I ask you to put them there? No one put them there. Then how did they get there? Locusts like warm places. They must have crawled in there on their own. Don't give me that. Grasshoppers don't just crawl in, and I wouldn't stand for it if they did. Now, why did you do this? We didn't do it, so we can't explain it. What a bunch of weasels. If they couldn't own up to their actions, they shouldn't have done it in the first place. They figured if there was no proof, they could just deny it. I'd played pranks in middle school, but I never chickened out when confronted. I admitted what I did and denied what I didn't. I was an honest prankster. I'd rather be punished than lie to get out of trouble. Pranks and punishment go hand in hand. Punishment makes the prank worthwhile. Getting away scot-free is cheap. These kids were no different from the loan sharks who borrow money but refuse to pay it back. What were they even doing in middle school? They learned to lie, cheat, play nasty pranks, and thought they were educated just because they graduated. What a useless bunch. Arguing with these delinquents was making me sick. Fine. If you won't tell me, I don't need to know. It's pathetic that middle school students can't distinguish between right and wrong, I said, and dismissed them. They sauntered out, looking smug. Outwardly, they looked more mature than me, their teacher. In reality, they were just calm and collected delinquents. I could never be that brazen. I went back to bed. The commotion had stirred up the mosquitoes, and they were buzzing around my head. I didn't feel like lighting a candle and burning them one by one. I unhooked the mosquito net, folded it lengthwise, and started swinging it around the room like a sword. The metal ring came loose and hit my hand. Ouch. The third time I went to bed, things were quieter, but I still couldn't sleep. It was 10:30. I really was in a tough spot. All middle school teachers must have a hard time dealing with brats like these. No wonder there was a teacher shortage. It had to be tough, strong, insensitive people who became teachers. I couldn't handle it. Kyo was amazing. She was uneducated and from a fallen family, but as a human being, she was truly noble. I hadn't fully appreciated her kindness before, but now, alone in this faraway place, I finally understood. If she wanted sashimi from Ekigo, I would gladly travel to Ekigo and buy it for her. She was worth it. Kyo praised me for being modest and honest, but she was the admirable one. I missed her. I was thinking about Kyo when suddenly there was a loud thud, thud, above my head, as if the second floor was collapsing. 30 or 40 people must have been stomping on the floorboards in unison. Then came a loud war cry. I jumped out of bed, startled. Those punks. They're getting back at me. They hadn't learned their lesson. They knew they were wrong. They should have waited until morning to apologize. Or at least stayed quiet out of fear. They were acting like a herd of pigs. I'll show them. I stormed out of the duty room in my pajamas and took the stairs 2 at a time, reaching the second floor in 3.5 strides. Strangely, the commotion above had stopped. There wasn't a sound. This was odd. The lights were out, so it was dark and I couldn't see anything, but I could tell if someone was there or not. The long corridor stretching from east to west was deserted. Moonlight streamed in from the end of the hallway, faintly illuminating the far end. This was strange. I was prone to vivid dreams. I'd often wake up suddenly, talking nonsense, and get laughed at. Once, I dreamt I found a diamond. I jumped out of bed and asked my brother, "Where's the diamond?" I became the laughingstock of the family for 3 days. Maybe this was a dream too. But I was sure I'd heard the commotion. I stood there in the middle of the hallway, pondering, when suddenly from the moonlit end of the hallway, I heard, 1, 2, 3, whoosh. The voices of 30 or 40 people merged into a single roar. And then, just as before, the stomping on the floorboards. See? It wasn't a dream. Be quiet. It's the middle of the night. I yelled, running towards the noise. My path was dark. The moonlight at the end of the hallway was my only guide. I'd barely taken 2 steps when I smashed my shin against something hard. Ouch! I cried, tumbling forward. Damn it! I tried to get up, but I couldn't run. My leg wouldn't move. I hopped forward on 1 foot, and the noise stopped. Silence. Even cowards weren't this cowardly. They were worse than pigs. I won't give up. I'll drag them out and make them apologize. I tried opening one of the dorm room doors, but it wouldn't budge. It was either locked or barricaded. I tried the room across the hall. Same thing. I was frantically trying to open the doors when the war cries and stomping started again, this time from the east end of the hallway. Those brats. They're mocking me. I was at a loss. I had courage but lacked brains. In situations like these, I never knew what to do. But I wasn't about to back down. This was a matter of pride. I was a Tokyoite. I wouldn't be ridiculed by a bunch of snot-nosed kids. I couldn't let them think I was too scared to do anything. If I didn't win tonight, I'd win tomorrow. If not tomorrow, the day after. I'd have my landlady bring me my meals. I'd stay here until I won. I sat cross-legged in the middle of the hallway and waited for daybreak. The mosquitoes were buzzing around, but I didn't care. I rubbed my shin. It was wet. Probably bleeding. Let it bleed. Exhaustion finally caught up with me, and I dozed off. I woke up to a commotion. Damn it. I jumped up. The door to my right was half open, and 2 students were standing there. As soon as I realized what was happening, I grabbed the leg of the nearest student and yanked it hard. He fell flat on his back. Serves you right. The other student hesitated. I lunged at him, grabbed his shoulder, and shoved him a few times. He blinked at me, dumbfounded. Come to the duty room, I ordered. He must have been a coward because he followed me without a word. The sky was already getting light. I started interrogating the student I'd dragged to the duty room, but he just kept repeating I dunno. He was like a pig. Beat him, throw him around, he's still a pig. He wasn't going to confess. One by one, other students started gathering in the duty room. They looked sleepy, rubbing their eyes. Pathetic. Couldn't even stay awake for one night. Wash your faces before you talk to me, I yelled, but none of them moved. I spent about an hour arguing with 50-odd students, when Raccoon showed up. Apparently, the janitor had gone to the principal's house and told him there was trouble at the school. What a coward. Couldn't even handle a few students on his own. No wonder he was a middle school janitor. The principal listened to my explanation, then listened to the students' excuses. I'll deal with this later, he said. For now, go back to your rooms and get ready for class. Wash your faces and eat breakfast. You'll be late. What a lenient punishment. I would have expelled them all on the spot. This was why the students took advantage of the duty teachers. Then he turned to me and said, You must be exhausted and worried. You don't have to teach today. I'm not worried, I replied. I can handle this every night if I have to. And if I can't teach after one sleepless night, I'll return my salary. The principal stared at me for a moment, then said, Your face is quite swollen. Now that he mentioned it, my face felt heavy, and it was itchy all over. The mosquitoes must have feasted on me. I scratched my face vigorously. Even if my face is swollen, I can still talk. I can still teach, I said. The principal chuckled. You're full of energy, he said. He wasn't praising me. He was mocking me. Chapter 5. Would you like to go fishing? Red Shirt asked. Red Shirt spoke in an uncomfortably soft voice. It was hard to tell if he was a man or a woman. Men should sound like men, especially university graduates. Even the students at the physics school had deeper voices than this literature graduate. It was pathetic, sure, I replied hesitantly. Have you ever been fishing? He asked, as if it was something unusual. Not really. When I was a kid, I caught 3 crucian carp at a fishing pond. And once, at the Bishamonten festival in Kagurazaka, I snagged an 8-inch carp, but I dropped it back in the water. I still regret it. Red Shirt jutted out his chin and chuckled, ho 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 ho. He didn't have to be so theatrical about it. So, you haven't experienced the true joy of fishing. I'd be happy to give you a lesson. As if I wanted a lesson from him. People who enjoyed fishing and hunting were heartless. You had to be heartless to kill animals for fun. Fish and birds preferred living to being killed. It was one thing if you hunted or fished for a living, but killing animals for sport when you had everything you needed was extravagant and cruel. I thought all this, but Red Shirt, being a literature graduate, was a smooth talker. I knew I couldn't win an argument, so I kept quiet. He mistook my silence for surrender. I'll teach you the ropes. How about today? You Shikoku and I are going. It'll be lonely with just the 2 of us, so come along. Shikoku was the art teacher, no good. For some reason, no good was always at Red Shirt's house, morning and night, following him around like a servant. It was unsettling. Red Shirt and No Good were always together, so it wasn't surprising they were going fishing together. But why invite me? He probably wanted to show off his fishing skills. Well, I wasn't going to be impressed. He could catch 100 tuna, and I wouldn't bat an eye. Still, I didn't want him thinking I was too scared or unskilled to go. If I don't go, I reasoned, he'll assume I'm too incompetent, not that I simply don't enjoy it. So I agreed to go. I went home after school to change, then met Red Shirt and No Good at the station. We went to the beach and hired a boat. There was only one boatman, and the boat was long and narrow, unlike anything I'd seen in Tokyo. I looked around, but I didn't see any fishing rods. How can you fish without rods? I asked No Good. You don't need rods for deep-sea fishing. Just lines, he replied, stroking his chin like an expert. I should have kept my mouth shut. The boatman rowed slowly but steadily. Before I knew it, the shore was a distant blur. The 5-story pagoda of Kakuji Temple rose above the trees, its spire sharp against the sky. Across the water, I saw Aoshima Island, a small, uninhabited island. I could just make out rocks and pine trees. I guess no one could live there. Red Shirt gazed at the scenery. Beautiful view, he declared. Stunning. No Good chimed in. Stunning or not, it was pleasant. The sea breeze was refreshing. I was getting hungry. Look at that pine tree, Red Shirt said to No Good. The trunk is perfectly straight, and the branches spread out like an umbrella. It's like a Turner painting. Exactly like a Turner, No Good agreed. The way it curves. It's uncanny. A perfect Turner. I didn't know who Turner was, but I didn't care enough to ask. The boat circled the island, keeping it to our right. The sea was calm, almost like a lake. Thanks to Red Shirt, I was having a surprisingly good time. I wanted to explore the island. Can't we get closer to the shore, near those rocks? I asked. We could, but it's not ideal for fishing, Red Shirt objected. I shut my mouth. How about we name that island Turner Island? No Good suggested. Excellent idea. We'll call it Turner Island from now on. Red Shirt agreed. If we included me, I objected. Aoshima was fine with me. Imagine placing a Raphael Madonna on those rocks, No Good said. What a painting that would make. Let's not talk about Madonnas, shall we? Ho 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 ho, Red Shirt chuckled nervously, glancing at me. I looked away. I had a bad feeling. Madonna must have been the nickname of one of Red Shirt's geisha girlfriends. He probably fantasized about taking her to the island and admiring her under the pine trees. No Good would probably paint a picture of it and submit it to an exhibition. This should be a good spot, the boatman said, stopping the boat and dropping anchor. How deep is it? Red Shirt asked. About 6 fathoms, the boatman replied. 6 fathoms. Tough to catch sea bream at that depth, Red Shirt muttered, casting his line. He was aiming for sea bream, the ambitious fellow. With your skills, I'm sure you'll catch something, No Good flattered him, casting his own line. It was just a line with a lead weight at the end. No float. Fishing without a float was like measuring temperature without a thermometer. Here, you try, Red Shirt said to me. You have some extra line, right? I have plenty of line, but no float, I said. Only amateurs need floats. Here's how you do it. When the weight hits the bottom, you feel the line with your index finger. When a fish bites, you'll feel it immediately. Red Shirt's line twitched. Got one, he exclaimed, reeling it in. It wasn't a fish. He'd just lost his bait. Served him right. Too bad, Red Shirt. That must have been a big one. No room for carelessness today. But even if it got away, it's better than staring at a float all day. It's like trying to ride a bicycle without handlebars. Right. Trying to ride a bicycle without handlebars. Right. No Good chattered incessantly. I wanted to punch him. I was a person too. Red Shirt didn't own the ocean. Even a beginner like me should be able to catch something in such a vast expanse. I cast my line, letting the weight sink, and played it with my fingers. After a while, I felt a tug on my line. This must be it, I thought. It has to be a fish. Only a living thing could tug like that. Got it, I yelled, pulling the line in. Did you catch something? The student surpasses the master, No Good teased. I'd almost reeled in all the line. I peered over the edge of the boat. A small, striped fish, like a goldfish, was attached to my hook, swimming back and forth. It was fascinating. As I pulled it out of the water, it flopped, splashing salt water all over my face. I grabbed it and tried to remove the hook, but it wouldn't come loose. The fish was slimy and disgusting. I shook the line, flinging the fish into the bottom of the boat. It died instantly. Red Shirt and No Good stared at me in amazement. I rinsed my hands in the seawater and sniffed them. They still smelled fishy. I was done. I didn't want to touch another fish. Fish probably didn't like being touched either. I reeled in my line and put it away. First catch is a big deal, but it's just a goby, No Good said condescendingly. Goby? That sounds like the name of a Russian novelist, Red Shirt quipped. It does. Just like a Russian novelist. No Good agreed instantly. Gorky might be a Russian novelist, but this fish was just a goby. This Red Shirt guy had a bad habit of naming everything after foreign writers. Everyone had their specialty. I was a math teacher. How was I supposed to know about Gorky or Tolstoy? He should have mentioned someone I knew, like Benjamin Franklin or Isaac Newton. Red Shirt often brought a bright red magazine called Imperial Literature to school and read it reverently. Red Tornado told me all of Red Shirt's foreign references came from that magazine. Imperial Literature was a dangerous magazine. Red Shirt and No Good continued fishing diligently. After about an hour, they caught 15 or 16 fish. Oddly enough, they were all gobies. No sea bream in sight. A bumper crop of Russian literature today, Red Shirt said to No Good. Thanks to your expert guidance. I'm just a novice, so catching gobies is to be expected, No Good replied. I asked the boatman about the gobies. He said they were bony, tasted bad, and weren't fit to eat. They were only good for fertilizer. Red Shirt and No Good were diligently fishing for fertilizer. How pathetic. I'd had enough after my one catch, so I lay down in the bottom of the boat and gazed at the sky. It was more entertaining than fishing. Then Red Shirt and No Good started whispering. I couldn't hear them, and I didn't want to. I was thinking about Kyo. If I had money, I would bring Kyo to a beautiful place like this. No matter how stunning the scenery, it was boring with No Good around. Kyo might be an old woman with wrinkles, but I would never be embarrassed to be seen with her. No Good, on the other hand, was an embarrassment, whether in a rickshaw, a boat, or the Ryumkaku Tower. If I were the vice principal and Red Shirt were me, I would surely make fun of him behind his back. They said Tokyoites were frivolous, and if they saw No Good strutting around the countryside, declaring himself a Tokyoite, they'd probably believe it. As I was thinking this, Red Shirt and No Good started chuckling. I caught snippets of their conversation. So? What do you think? Definitely, he has no idea. What a crime. No way, the grasshoppers, really. I hadn't been paying attention, but when No Good said grasshoppers with exaggerated emphasis, I perked up. He deliberately enunciated grasshoppers clearly, then mumbled the rest. I listened intently. Hotter again, maybe. Tempura, ha 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 ha, instigating, the dango too? The conversation was fragmented, but from the keywords, grasshoppers, tempura, dango, I gathered they were talking about me. If they were going to talk about me, they should speak louder. Or better yet, not invite me in the first place. What a bunch of jerks. It wasn't my fault about the grasshoppers. The principal told me to leave them alone, so I was just respecting his wishes. No Good had no right to criticize me. He should just shut up and stick to licking his paintbrushes. I'd deal with these matters myself eventually. But I was curious about the phrases hotter again and instigating. Did they mean Red Tornado had instigated the grasshopper incident? Or that he'd instigated the students to prank me? I couldn't tell. I watched the sky. The sunlight was fading, and a cool breeze was picking up. Wispy, incense smoke-like clouds drifted across the clear blue canvas, then dissolved into a faint haze. Shall we head back? Red Shirt asked, as if just remembering I was there. Yes, perfect timing. Are you seeing your Madonna tonight? No Good replied. Don't be absurd. Red Shirt snapped, then, realizing I was listening, leaned back against the side of the boat and forced a laugh. He's just teasing, don't listen to him. No Good turned around. If he only knew. I glared at him. He cowered, ducking his head and scratching it. What a phony. The boat glided across the calm water towards the shore. You don't seem to enjoy fishing, Red Shirt remarked. I prefer lying down and looking at the sky, I replied, tossing my half-smoked cigarette into the water. It sizzled and drifted away on the ripples created by the oars. The students are delighted you've joined the faculty, Red Shirt said, changing the subject. So please, make an effort. I doubt they're delighted, I said. Don't be modest. They really are. Aren't they, Yushikawa? Delighted isn't the word for it. They're ecstatic. No Good smirked. Everything he said annoyed me. Be careful, though. Things can get dangerous, Red Shirt warned. I'm already expecting danger. I'm prepared for it, I replied. I was either going to get fired or make those students apologize, one or the other. I had made up my mind. That's a bit extreme. What I mean is, I'm saying this for your own good. As the vice principal, I want you to succeed. I don't want you to make any mistakes. We both came from Tokyo, so I'm trying to help you, Red Shirt stammered. I'm doing my best to support you. I want you to stay at the school as long as possible. We're both on your side. No Good added. As if I needed his help. I'd rather hang myself. What I'm trying to say is, Red Shirt continued, the students welcomed you with open arms, but there are certain circumstances. You might be upset by some things, but please bear with it. No one intends to harm you. What circumstances? It's a bit complicated. You'll understand eventually. You'll figure it out without me having to explain, right, Yushikawa? Yes, it is quite complicated. You can't understand it overnight. But you'll understand eventually. You'll figure it out without me having to explain. No Good parroted Red Shirt. If it's that complicated, I don't need to know. But since you brought it up, you're right. It's irresponsible of me to start a conversation and not finish it. Let me just say this. You're fresh out of school, and this is your first teaching job. But schools aren't always rational. Things don't always work out the way a student might expect. How do they work out, then? Well, you see, you're still quite inexperienced. Of course, I'm inexperienced. As I wrote in my resume, I'm 23 years and 4 months old. So, you might be taken advantage of. I'm not afraid of being taken advantage of. I'm honest. Of course, you're not afraid, but you might be taken advantage of. Your predecessor was. So you need to be careful. No Good had gone quiet. I turned around and saw him chatting with the boatman about fishing. With No Good gone, the conversation flowed more smoothly. Who took advantage of my predecessor? I can't say who, for their sake. And I don't have concrete evidence, so it would be reckless of me to accuse anyone. The point is, I don't want you to fail. We brought you here, and we want you to succeed. So please, be careful. How can I be more careful? Just don't do anything bad, right? Red Shirt chuckled, ho 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 ho. I hadn't said anything funny. I still believe what I said was perfectly logical. It seemed like most people in the world encouraged bad behavior. They believed you couldn't succeed in society without being dishonest. They looked down on honest, innocent people, calling them naive and childish. Maybe elementary and middle schools should stop teaching ethics. They should teach kids how to lie, how to be distrustful, how to manipulate others. That would be more useful in the real world. Red Shirt was laughing at my naivete. In a world where innocence and honesty were mocked, there was nothing I could do. Kyo would never have laughed. She would have listened attentively. Kyo was far superior to Red Shirt. Of course, it's best to avoid doing bad things, he continued, but even if you're honest, if you don't recognize when others are being dishonest, you'll suffer the consequences. There are people in this world who seem generous and kind, who might even help you find a place to stay, but you can't trust them. It's getting cold. Autumn is in the air. Look, the beach is bathed in a sepia-colored haze. Beautiful, isn't it? Hey, you Shikoku. What do you think of the view? He called out to No Good. Exquisite. Sublime. If I had the time, I'd paint it. What a shame to let such beauty go to waste, No Good gushed. The lights of the Minatoya twinkled in the distance, and the train whistle blew. Our boat scraped against the sand, and the bow came to rest on the beach. Welcome back, the innkeeper's wife greeted Red Shirt from the shore. I awkwardly climbed out of the boat and jumped onto the beach. Chapter 6. I hated No Good. He was a menace to society. Red Shirt's voice annoyed me. He was deliberately affecting that soft tone. He couldn't be that effeminate naturally. And with his looks, even Madonna was too good for him. But as annoying as he was, Red Shirt had a point. When I thought about what he'd said, it made sense. He was hinting that Red Tornado was a bad influence and I should be careful. If that was the case, he should have just said it outright. It was cowardly of him. And if Red Tornado was such a bad teacher, why not fire him? Red Shirt, despite being a literature graduate, was spineless. He couldn't even mention Red Tornado's name, so he must have been a coward. Cowards were usually kind, so Red Shirt must have been one of those effeminate, kind types. Kindness was kindness, and voice was voice. I couldn't dislike his kindness just because his voice annoyed me. The world was a strange place. Annoying people could be kind, and likable people could be villains. Maybe it was because this was the countryside, everything was the opposite of Tokyo. It was a dangerous place. Any day now, fire might turn into ice and stones into tofu. But Red Tornado instigating the students? It seemed unlikely. He was the most popular teacher. He could probably get away with anything if he wanted to, but why bother with such roundabout methods? If he wanted me gone, he could just ask me to resign. I'd be happy to oblige. I wasn't attached to this place. Red Tornado seemed like a straightforward guy. When I first arrived, Red Tornado had treated me to shaved ice. It bothered me to be indebted to someone who was two-faced. I only had one bowl, so it only cost him 1.5 sen. But 1.5 sen was still 1.5 sen. I didn't like being indebted to a swindler. I decided I would repay him the next day. I owed Kyo 3 yen. I hadn't repaid her in 5 years. I wasn't going to repay her. Not because I didn't want to, but because Kyo didn't expect me to. She didn't lend me the money with the expectation of getting it back. I wasn't going to treat her like a stranger by offering to repay her. Not repaying her was my way of showing her I considered her family. Kyo and Red Tornado were incomparable, but even a small gesture of kindness, like treating someone to shaved ice, was a way of showing respect. Paying someone back was a simple transaction. Feeling grateful for their kindness was a different kind of repayment. It was a way of acknowledging their generosity and recognizing them as a fellow human being. I considered not repaying Red Tornado as a compliment, a sign of respect. He should be grateful. To think that he would stab me in the back after that. What a jerk. I would return his 1.5 sen. Then we'd be even, and I could fight him. I decided to get to school early the next day and intercept Red Tornado. But he didn't show up. Unripe arrived. The Chinese classics teacher arrived. No Good arrived. Even Red Shirt arrived, but Red Tornado's desk remained empty, with only a single piece of chalk lying on its side. I'd brought the 1.5 sen with me, clutched tightly in my palm, ready to return it. My hands were sweaty, and the coins were damp. I didn't want to return sweaty coins, so I put them on his desk and blew on them. Then I clutched them in my hand again. Red Shirt came up to me. "Sorry about yesterday," he said. "It must have been unpleasant." "Not at all," I replied. "It just made me hungry." He leaned on Red Tornado's desk, his face close to mine. "About our conversation on the boat yesterday," he began. "Please keep it confidential." He was such a worrier. Of course, I would keep it confidential. But I was planning to confront Red Tornado. It was awkward that Red Shirt was asking me to keep quiet. He'd given me a riddle about Red Tornado, and now he was telling me not to solve it. He should be supporting me, not silencing me. He was the vice principal, after all. "I haven't told anyone yet, but I'm planning to talk to Red Tornado," I said. Red Shirt panicked. You can't. I never specifically accused Hotter of anything. If you start a fight, it'll be a problem for me. You didn't come here to cause trouble, did you? What a strange question. Of course not. I came here to work, not to cause trouble. The school wouldn't be happy if I did. Then please, for my sake, keep this to yourself, he pleaded. What an effeminate man. He made illogical demands and acted as if they were perfectly reasonable. And he was suspicious of me. I was a man of my word. I wouldn't go back on my promises. Fine, I said. I'll keep quiet, even though it's inconvenient. I don't want to cause trouble for you. Are you sure? He pressed. He was so insecure. Literature graduates were all so tedious. The other teachers arrived, so Red Shirt scurried back to his desk. He even walked theatrically, placing his feet softly to avoid making noise. He must have thought he was being stealthy. It was ridiculous. Just walk normally. The first period bell rang. Red Tornado still hadn't arrived. I left the 1.5 sen on his desk and went to class. After my first class, I returned to the staff room. The other teachers were chatting at their desks. Red Tornado had finally arrived. He was late, not absent. You made me late today, he said, as soon as he saw me. You owe me a fine. I placed the 1.5 sen on his desk. Here. Take it. For the shaved ice you treated me to the other day. He was about to laugh, but seeing my serious expression, he stopped and swept the coins back onto my desk. What are you talking about? He was still trying to act like he was treating me. I'm serious. I'm returning your money. I didn't want to be indebted to you. But I've been thinking, and I've decided I don't mind being indebted to you after all. So I'm taking it back. If you're that bothered by 1.5 sen, keep it. But why are you returning it now, after all this time? Now, later, it doesn't matter. I'm returning it because I don't like being indebted to you. Red Tornado stared at me coldly and snorted. If Red Shirt hadn't asked me to keep quiet, I would have called him out on his hypocrisy and started a fight. How could he snort at me when I was being so earnest? I'll take the money for the shaved ice, but you have to move out of your lodgings. I'll take the money, but I'll move out when I'm ready. You don't have a choice. The landlord came to see me yesterday and asked me to get you to leave. He has a good reason. I didn't understand what he was talking about. What did the landlord tell you? How do you know he has a good reason? It's rude of you to assume his right without even asking me. Fine. I'll tell you. You're too rough and wild. The landlady can't handle you. She's not your servant. You can't just tell her to wipe your feet. When did I ever tell the landlady to wipe my feet? I don't know if you did or didn't. The point is, she wants you out. So move out. Of course, I'll move out. Do you think I'd stay there even if they begged me? It's your fault for recommending such an awful place. Is it my fault, or are you just difficult? Red Tornado had a temper, just like me. He raised his voice. The other teachers in the staff room were watching us, their chins hanging open. I wasn't embarrassed. I stood up and looked around the room defiantly. Everyone looked surprised, except Nogood, who was smirking. I glared at him. You want a piece of this too? My glare must have scared him because his smirk vanished and he bowed his head respectfully. The bell rang. Red Tornado and I abandoned our argument and went to our respective classes. That afternoon, there was a faculty meeting to discuss the punishment for the students who pranked me. It was my first faculty meeting, so I had no idea what to expect. I figured the teachers would express their opinions, and then the principal would make a decision. Decision implied there was some ambiguity. But this case was clear-cut. The students were clearly in the wrong. The principal should just punish them and be done with it. What a waste of time. What a spineless principal. The meeting room was a long, narrow room next to the principal's office. It usually served as a dining hall. 20 leather chairs surrounded a long table. It looked like a Western restaurant in Canada. The principal sat at the head of the table, with Red Shirt next to him. Everyone else could sit wherever they liked, except for the gymnastics teacher, who always sat at the far end of the table, out of modesty. I sat between the biology teacher and the Chinese classics teacher. Across the table, Red Tornado and No Good were sitting next to each other. No Good's face was still unsettling. Even in a fight, Red Tornado had more dignity. He reminded me of a hanging scroll at Igenji Temple in Kobanata that I'd seen at my father's funeral. I asked the monk about it, and he said it was a portrait of Ida 10, a mythical creature. Red Tornado was glaring at me again. I glared back. I wasn't intimidated. Is everyone here? The principal asked. Kawamura, the clerk, counted heads. One person is missing. One person was indeed missing. Unripe. Ever since I met Unripe, I couldn't forget his face. He was always the first person I noticed in the staff room. Even when I was walking down the street, his image would pop into my head. I'd often see him at the hot springs, his pale, puffy face bobbing in the bath. He always greeted me politely, bowing his head humbly. He was the quietest teacher at the school, never laughing or speaking unnecessarily. I'd read about gentlemen in books, but I thought they were fictional. After meeting Unripe, I realized they did exist. He was the most gentlemanly person I'd ever met, that I'd been so preoccupied with Unripe's absence that I hadn't noticed the principal unfolding a purple cloth bundle and reading from a document that looked like it was printed with woodblocks. Red Shirt was polishing his amber pipe with a silk handkerchief. He was obsessed with his pipe. It suited him. The other teachers were whispering to each other. I idly doodled on the table with the eraser end of my pencil. No Good was trying to talk to Red Tornado, but Red Tornado wasn't responding. He just grunted occasionally and glared at me. I glared back. Unripe finally arrived, looking apologetic. I apologize for being late. I had some business to attend to, he said politely to the principal. Let's begin, the principal said, handing out copies of the agenda. The first item was disciplinary action. The second was student supervision. And a few other items. The principal cleared his throat and said, any misconduct on the part of the faculty or students is a reflection of my own shortcomings. Every time an incident occurs, I question my own competence as principal. I am deeply ashamed that such a disturbance has occurred once again, and I sincerely apologize to all of you. However, since the incident has already occurred, we must take appropriate action. You are all aware of the facts, so please share your thoughts on how to proceed. I was impressed. He took full responsibility for the incident. If he felt that strongly about it, he should resign instead of punishing the students. It was common sense. I was on duty. The students caused a disturbance. The students were at fault, not the principal or me. If Red Tornado had instigated them, then he should be punished along with the students. It was ridiculous for the principal to take the blame. He finished his speech and looked around the room smugly. No one spoke. The biology teacher was watching crows on the roof. The Chinese classics teacher was folding and unfolding his copy of the agenda. Red Tornado was still glaring at me. If faculty meetings were this pointless, I'd rather take a nap. I was about to speak when Red Shirt cleared his throat and began to speak. I decided to wait. He put away his pipe and wiped his face with a striped silk handkerchief. That handkerchief was probably a gift from Madonna. Men should use white linen handkerchiefs. As vice principal, I am deeply ashamed of the students' behavior and my own failure to instill proper values in them, he said. Such incidents occur when there are underlying issues. It might seem like the students are solely responsible, but the true cause may lie with the school itself. Therefore, I believe it would be unwise to impose harsh punishments based solely on appearances. Moreover, these are young, impulsive students. They may have acted without fully considering the consequences. Of course, the final decision rests with the principal, but I urge you to consider the circumstances and be lenient in your judgment. So, the students were acting out because of the teacher's faults. If a lunatic attacked someone, it was the victim's fault for provoking the lunatic. How convenient. If they were so full of energy, they should go outside and wrestle. I wasn't going to tolerate grasshoppers in my futon. At this rate, if they murdered someone, he'd probably let them go because they acted without fully considering the consequences. I was about to say something, but I needed to gather my thoughts. I wanted to make a strong, impactful statement. I have a habit of getting tongue-tied when I'm angry. Raccoon and Red Shirt might be inferior to me as human beings, but they were skilled orators. I didn't want to make a fool of myself by getting flustered and making a mistake. I was formulating my argument in my head when No Good suddenly stood up. The nerve of him, expressing his opinion. He said, in his usual flippant tone, "This grasshopper incident, as well as the yelling incident, is a matter of great concern for all of us who care about the future of our school. We, as faculty members, must take this opportunity for self-reflection and strive to improve the school's discipline. I wholeheartedly agree with the wise and insightful opinions expressed by the principal and vice principal. I urge you to be lenient in your judgment." No Good's words were empty. He just strung together a bunch of fancy words. The only part one understood was "I wholeheartedly agree." Even though I didn't understand what he was saying, I was annoyed. I stood up before I could form a complete thought. "I wholeheartedly disagree," I blurted out. Then I blanked. Such a ridiculous punishment is unacceptable. The teachers burst out laughing. "The students are entirely at fault. They need to apologize, or they'll never learn. Expel them if you have to. Don't disrespect me just because I'm the new teacher." I sat down. The biology teacher next to me said, "The students are at fault, of course, but severe punishment might backfire." I agree with the vice principal. Leniency is the best approach. The Chinese classics teacher agreed with the leniency approach. The history teacher also agreed with Red Shirt. Damn it. They were all on Red Shirt's side. This school was hopeless. I'd decided I would either make the students apologize or resign. If Red Shirt's side won, I would pack my bags and leave. I couldn't win a battle of wits against these people, and even if I did, I didn't want to stay here any longer. They'd probably just laugh at me again anyway. I kept quiet, refusing to give them the satisfaction. Then, Red Tornado stood up abruptly. "Don't tell me he's going to agree with Red Shirt," I thought. "If he does, we're going to fight." "I don't care." Red Tornado's voice boomed through the room. "I completely disagree with the vice principal and the others. This incident is a clear case of 50 boarding students disrespecting and mocking their new teacher. The vice principal seems to attribute the cause to the teacher's personality, but with all due respect, that is a misjudgment. It has only been 20 days since the teacher arrived. The students haven't had enough time to assess his character or abilities. If there was a valid reason for their disrespect, leniency might be warranted. However, there is no excuse for mocking a new teacher. Such behavior undermines the school's authority. The purpose of education is not simply to impart knowledge. It is also to cultivate noble, honest, and courageous individuals, and to eradicate vulgarity, frivolity, and arrogance. If we are afraid of repercussions or further disturbances, how can we correct such behavior? We are here to prevent such incidents. If we tolerate this, we shouldn't be teachers in the first place. Therefore, I believe the appropriate course of action is to severely punish all the students involved and make them apologize publicly to the teacher. He sat down with a thud. Everyone was silent. Red Shirt started polishing his pipe again. I was ecstatic. Red Tornado had expressed exactly what I wanted to say. I was so happy, I almost clapped. But I didn't want to draw attention to myself, so I just looked at Red Tornado gratefully. He ignored me, as if nothing had happened. After a moment, Red Tornado stood up again. "I forgot to mention one more thing. The teacher on duty that night apparently left the school and went to the hot springs. That is unacceptable. A teacher on duty should not abandon their post and go to the hot springs. What a strange guy. He just defended me, and now he was criticizing me. I hadn't known it was against the rules to leave the school during overnight duty. I assumed it was allowed because the teacher on duty the night I arrived had also gone out. He had a point. I stood up. I admit I went to the hot springs while on duty. I was wrong. I apologize." I sat down. The teachers burst out laughing again. They laughed at everything I said. How annoying. Could any of them admit their mistakes so readily? They laughed because they couldn't. The principal said, "It seems we've heard all opinions. I'll make a decision after careful consideration." The students were given a week of detention and made to apologize to me. If they hadn't apologized, I would have resigned and gone back to Tokyo. But they did apologize, and that's when things really went downhill. I'll explain later. The principal continued, the students' behavior reflects the influence of their teachers. Therefore, as a first step, I ask all teachers to refrain from frequenting establishments such as restaurants. Exceptions can be made for special occasions, such as farewell parties, but I advise against visiting less reputable establishments alone, such as soba shops and dango shops. The teachers laughed again. No Good nudged Red Tornado and whispered, tempura. Red Tornado ignored him. Serves him right that I wasn't very bright, so I didn't fully understand the principal's logic, but I figured if a middle school teacher couldn't even eat soba or dango, it was impossible for someone like me, who had no other hobbies, to survive in this place. If that was the case, they should have mentioned it in the job description. It wasn't fair to hire me, give me a contract, and then forbid me from eating soba and dango. Red Shirt spoke up again. Middle school teachers are supposed to be role models for society. We should not be pursuing mere physical pleasures. Such indulgences can have a negative impact on our character. However, we are human, and we need some form of entertainment, especially in a small, isolated town like this. Therefore, we should pursue more refined, intellectual pursuits, such as fishing, reading literature, writing modern poetry or haiku. He droned on and on. If fishing for fertilizer, obsessing over Russian novelists, fantasizing about geishas under pine trees, and writing about frogs jumping into ponds were considered intellectual pursuits, then eating tempura and dango were intellectual pursuits too. I'd rather do Red Shirt's laundry than engage in those pointless hobbies. I was so annoyed, I blurted out, is visiting Madonna an intellectual pursuit? No one laughed this time. They exchanged glances, their faces grim. Red Shirt looked down, his face contorted in discomfort. See? I got him. I felt bad for Unripe, though. He'd turned even paler than usual. Chapter 7. I moved out of the inn that night. As I was packing, the innkeeper's wife asked, was something wrong? Did we do something to offend you? Please tell us, and we'll make amends. I was stunned. How could anyone be so clueless? Did they want me to stay or leave? They were crazy. I didn't want to waste my breath arguing with them, so I called a rickshaw and left. I didn't have a destination in mind. Where to, sir? The rickshaw man asked. Just follow me. I'll figure it out, I said, and we set off. I considered going back to Yamashiroya, but I'd just have to move out again, which was a hassle. As we rode through the quiet, residential streets, I kept an eye out for signs advertising rooms for rent. I figured whichever place I saw first would be my new home. I ended up in Kageyamachi, a district with samurai residences, not inns or lodgings. I was about to turn back when I had an idea. Unripe lived in this district. He was a local and had inherited his ancestral home, so he must be familiar with the neighborhood. I could ask him for recommendations. I knew where he lived, so I didn't have to waste time searching. Excuse me, I called out, stopping at a gate. An elderly woman, about 50, came out with an old-fashioned paper lantern. I didn't mind young women, but I had a soft spot for the elderly. I probably liked old women because I liked Kyo. Her spirit must have possessed all the grandmothers in the world. This must be Unripe's mother. She was a dignified woman with a refined air, and she resembled Unripe. Please, come in, she said. Actually, I just need a moment of your time. I called Unripe to the entrance and explained my situation. I'm looking for a new place to stay. Do you know of any vacancies? Oh dear, that's quite a predicament, he said, then paused to think. There's an elderly couple named Hayino who live in the back alley. They told me they had a spare room they were willing to rent out if they found a suitable tenant. I don't know if it's still available, but let's go and ask. He kindly led me to their house. I moved into the Hayino's house that night. To my surprise, No Good moved into my old room at the inn the next day. The nerve. Even I was shocked. Maybe the world was full of con artists, all trying to take advantage of each other. I was disgusted. If the world was like this, I had to fight fire with fire. If I had to rob and swindle to survive, so be it. I wasn't going to kill myself. I had a perfectly healthy body, and it would be disrespectful to my ancestors to throw my life away. I should have used the 600 yen to start a milk delivery business instead of wasting it on the physics school and learning useless math. Then Kyo could have stayed with me in Tokyo, and I wouldn't have to worry about her. I hadn't appreciated her as much when I was with her, but now that I was far away, I realized what a good person she was. She was one of a kind. I wondered how she was doing. She'd caught a cold before I left. She must have been happy to receive my letter. I was expecting a reply by now. Has any mail arrived from Tokyo? I asked the landlady. Not yet, she replied with a sympathetic look. The hyenos, unlike the innkeeper and his wife, were former samurai and had a refined air. The old man chanted no plays every night, which was annoying, but at least he didn't bother me with let me make you some tea like the innkeeper. The landlady often came to my room to chat. Why didn't you bring your wife with you? She asked. Wife? Do I look married? I'm only 24. Even so, it's perfectly normal to be married at 24, she said. She then proceeded to list half a dozen examples of people who were married with children in their early 20s. Well, if I were to get married, would you take care of me? I asked, imitating her dialect. Really? She asked, her eyes wide. Really, really. I'm desperate to get married. I see. All young men feel that way. I couldn't argue with that. But I'm sure you already have a wife. I can tell. How can you tell? Because you keep asking about mail from Tokyo. You're eagerly awaiting a letter from her, aren't you? Wow. You're perceptive. I am, aren't I? But young women these days are different from those in the past. You can't be too careful. What do you mean? Is my wife cheating on me in Tokyo? No, no, your wife is a good woman. Oh, good. Then what should I be careful about? Your wife is a good woman, but what? There are others. Do you know Miss Toyama? No, I don't. You don't? She's the most beautiful woman in town. Everyone calls her Madonna. Madonna? I thought that was a geisha's name. No, no. Madonna is a foreign word for a beautiful woman. Is that so? Interesting. I think the art teacher gave her that nickname. No good. Yes, Mr. Yoshikawa. And this Madonna is untrustworthy? Yes, she's a dangerous woman. There used to be women nicknamed Demon Omatsu and Dakio Hyaku, fearsome women. Is Madonna one of them? You see, she was engaged to Mr. Koga, the one who helped you find this place, Unripe. I didn't know he was so lucky with the ladies. You can't judge a book by its cover. So, what happened? Last year, her father passed away. They were wealthy, with bank stocks and everything, but after his death, for some reason, their finances took a turn for the worse. Mr. Koga is too kind, so he was probably taken advantage of. The wedding was postponed, and then Red Shirt arrived and proposed to Miss Toyama. Red Shirt? That scoundrel. I knew there was something fishy about that shirt. So, what happened then? Miss Toyama's family consulted with others and told Mr. Koga they needed time to consider. They felt obligated to him. Then Red Shirt started visiting Miss Toyama, and, well, he seduced her. It's a disgrace. She agreed to marry Mr. Koga, and now she's switching to Red Shirt just because he's a literature graduate. That's unforgivable. You're telling me. It's unforgivable. Unforgivable now, unforgivable tomorrow, unforgivable forever. Everyone feels sorry for Mr. Koga. Mr. Hotter went to Red Shirt to protest, but Red Shirt said he had no intention of stealing Miss Toyama. He said he might marry her if the engagement was broken off, but for now, he was simply courting her, and there was nothing wrong with that. Mr. Hotter had no choice but to back down. They say there's bad blood between them now. You're well informed. How do you know all this? Small towns have their ways. Too many ways. She probably knew about the tempura and dango incidents too. This town was dangerous. But at least I now understood the Madonna situation and the conflict between Red Tornado and Red Shirt. The only problem was, I still couldn't tell who was the villain. I needed things to be black and white. I couldn't choose sides if everything was grey. So, who's the good guy? Red Shirt or Red Tornado? Red Tornado? Mr. Hotter. Well, Mr. Hotter seems tougher, but Red Shirt is a literature graduate, so he's probably more capable. And he's definitely gentler. But the students prefer Mr. Hotter. So, who's the good guy? The one who earns more money, I suppose. That wasn't helpful. I gave up. A few days later, I came home from school, and the landlady greeted me with a smile. I've been waiting for you. It finally arrived. She handed me a letter. It was from Kyo. It had several labels attached. It had gone from Yamashiroya to the inn, then from the inn to Hayino's. And it had stayed at Yamashiroya for a week. The innkeeper probably thought it was a guest too. The letter was long. It started with, "I wanted to reply to your letter right away, but I caught a cold and was bedridden for a week, so I apologize for the delay. I'm not as skilled at reading and writing as young ladies these days, so it took me a while to write this. I considered asking my nephew to write it for me, but I thought you'd prefer a letter written by me, so I spent 4 days drafting it and 2 days rewriting it. My handwriting is probably awful, but I wrote this with all my heart, so please read it to the end." The letter went on for 4 pages. It was hard to read, not just because of the handwriting, but also because it was mostly written in hiragana, with no punctuation. I was impatient and hated long, difficult-to-read letters. I wouldn't read a letter like this even if someone paid me 5 yen. But this time, I read it from beginning to end. It was such a struggle to decipher, I had to reread it from the beginning. The room was getting dark, making it even harder to read, so I went out to the veranda. An early autumn breeze rustled the banana leaves and brushed against my skin. The pages of the letter fluttered in the wind, threatening to fly over the hedge. I didn't care. Botchan has a straightforward personality, but he's too short-tempered. Don't give people nicknames. It will make them resent you. If you do give them nicknames, tell me about it in your letters. Country people can be mean, so be careful. The weather is more unpredictable here than in Tokyo, so don't catch a cold. Your letter was too short. I couldn't understand what was going on. Next time, write at least half as much as this letter. It's generous of you to give the inn 5 yen, but are you sure you can afford it? Money is the only thing you can rely on in the countryside, so be frugal. I'm sending you 10 yen just in case. I deposited the 50 yen you gave me at the post office. I'm saving it for you, for when you get your own house in Tokyo. Even after sending you 10 yen, you still have 40 yen left, so don't worry. Women were so attentive to detail. As I sat on the veranda, pondering Kyo's letter, the landlady slid open the door and brought me dinner. "Still reading? That's quite a long letter," she remarked. "It's an important letter," I said vaguely. "I have to read it carefully." It was sweet potato stew again. The food here was better than at the inn, more refined and healthier, but it was bland. Sweet potato yesterday, sweet potato the day before yesterday, and sweet potato again tonight. I liked sweet potatoes, but I couldn't survive on sweet potatoes alone. I'd become unripe myself before I knew it. Kyo would have made me tuna sashimi or grilled kamaboko. But I couldn't expect such delicacies from poor, stingy samurai. I needed Kyo. If I had to stay at that school any longer, I would bring her to Shikoku. I couldn't live without tempura soba, dango, and decent food. I'd turn yellow from eating sweet potatoes. Even Buddhist monks ate better than this. I finished the sweet potato stew and ate 2 raw eggs from my drawer to get some protein. I needed my strength for 21 hours of teaching a week. Kyo's letter had made me late for my daily trip to the hot springs. I couldn't skip a day, it felt wrong. I grabbed my red towel and headed for the station. The train had just left, so I had to wait. I sat on a bench, humming Shikishima, when Unripe arrived. After hearing what the landlady told me, I felt even sorrier for him. He always seemed so small and timid, like he was just a guest in his own life. But tonight, he looked utterly defeated. I wanted to double his salary, let him marry Miss Toyoma, and send them on a honeymoon to Tokyo. "Are you going to the hot springs?" "Here, have a seat," I offered, gesturing to the empty space next to me. "No, thank you," he declined, remaining standing. "The train won't be here for a while. You'll get tired standing. Have a seat." I wanted him to sit next to me. I wanted to comfort him. "If you insist," he said finally, sitting down. Some people, like No Good, were nosy and intrusive. Others, like Red Tornado, acted as if the world revolved around them. Some, like Red Shirt, were obsessed with appearances. And then there was Raccoon, who, despite looking like a raccoon, wore a frock coat as if it made him human. They were all so full of themselves. But Unripe was different. He was humble and unassuming, like a hostage. I'd never met anyone like him. His face was puffy, but he was a good man. I couldn't believe Madonna would choose Red Shirt over him. Red Shirt wasn't even in the same league. Just then, I heard the sound of women's laughter coming from the entrance. I turned around and saw them. A tall, beautiful woman with fair skin and stylish hair, and an older woman, about 45, were standing at the ticket window. I wasn't good at describing beauty, but the younger woman was undeniably beautiful. She made me feel like I was holding a warm, crystal orb in my hand. The older woman was shorter, but they resembled each other. Mother and daughter, probably. I was so captivated by the younger woman that I completely forgot about Unripe. He suddenly stood up and walked towards them. I was surprised. Is that Madonna? I wondered. The three of them exchanged greetings in front of the ticket window. They were too far away, so I couldn't hear what they were saying. The station clock showed that the train would arrive in 5 minutes. I was getting impatient. I was alone again, and I wanted the train to arrive quickly. Then another person rushed into the station. Red Shirt. He was wearing a flashy kimono with a loose, crepe sash and his trademark gold chain. That chain was fake. He thought he was fooling everyone, but I knew better. He scanned the station, then spotted the three figures at the ticket window. He bowed politely to them and exchanged a few words. Then he walked towards me, his footsteps light and theatrical. "Oh, you're going to the hot springs too?" I was worried I'd missed the train, so I rushed over here. "But we still have a few minutes. I wonder if that clock is accurate." He pulled out his gold pocket watch. "It's 2 minutes fast," he declared, sitting down next to me. The younger woman didn't look at us. She was staring straight ahead, her chin resting on her walking stick. The older woman glanced at Red Shirt occasionally, but the younger woman remained turned away. That's definitely Madonna, I thought. The train arrived. The waiting passengers boarded. Red Shirt jumped into the first-class carriage. The first-class fare to Sumida was 5 sen, and the second-class fare was 3 sen. Only a 2 sen difference. Even I, a 40 NA month teacher, could afford first class. But the locals were cheap. They mostly rode second class. Madonna and her mother followed Red Shirt into the first-class carriage. Unripe was a second-class kind of guy. He stood hesitantly at the entrance to the second-class carriage, then, catching my eye, quickly boarded. I followed him. There was nothing wrong with riding second class with a first-class ticket. I ran into Unripe again at the hot springs. I was usually tongue-tied in formal settings, but in casual situations, I could be quite talkative. I tried to engage him in conversation. I felt sorry for him. As a Tokyoite, I felt obligated to cheer him up. But he wasn't very responsive. He just gave one-word answers, yes or no. It was so awkward. I eventually gave up. I didn't see Red Shirt at the hot springs. There were several baths, so it was possible to miss someone even if you arrived on the same train. I didn't think much of it. When I left the hot springs, the moon was shining brightly. Willow trees lined the streets, casting round shadows on the road. I decided to take a walk. I walked north, towards the edge of town. On my left, I saw a large gate. Beyond the gate was a temple, flanked by brothels. A red light district inside a temple gate? That was a new one. I was curious, but I didn't want to risk another lecture from Raccoon, so I walked on. Next to the gate was the dango shop where I'd caused trouble. Round paper lanterns, advertising Shiruko and Ozoni, hung from the eaves, their light illuminating the trunk of a nearby willow tree. I wanted some dango, but I resisted the temptation and kept walking. It was frustrating not being able to eat dango. But it was even more frustrating to have your fiancé stolen by another man. I thought about Unripe and decided I could go without dango. I could even fast for 3 days if it meant easing his pain. People were so unreliable. Unripe didn't seem like the kind of person to be betrayed, but you never knew. Beautiful people could be cruel, and puffy-faced people like Unripe could be kind and gentle. Red Tornado, whom I'd initially thought was straightforward, was supposedly instigating the students. The students apologized, then continued their pranks. The innkeeper kicked me out, and No Good took my place. Nothing made sense. I'd tell Kyo about it, and she'd probably say it was because this place was beyond her cone, where all the monsters lived. I was usually easygoing, but after less than a month in this town, I'd become wary of the world. Nothing major had happened, yet I felt years older. I wanted to go back to Tokyo. Lost in thought, I crossed a stone bridge and found myself on the bank of the Nozeri River. It was more of a stream than a river, only about 6 feet wide. If you followed it downstream for about 2 miles, you'd reach Aioi village, where there was a temple dedicated to Kannon. I looked back at the hot spring town. Red lights twinkled in the moonlight. The sound of drums drifted from the red light district. The river was shallow but fast-flowing, its surface shimmering like quicksilver. I walked along the river bank. After about half a mile, I saw 2 figures in the distance, silhouetted against the moonlight. Young men returning to the village from the hot springs, probably. But they were unusually quiet. No singing. As I walked closer, the figures grew larger. One of them was a woman. When I was about 10 yards away, the man turned around. The moon was behind me, illuminating his face. I recognized him. The man and woman continued walking. I quickened my pace and caught up to them. I brushed past the man, turned around, and looked him in the face. The moonlight illuminated my face, from my crew cut to my chin. "Oh," the man gasped, turning away and hurrying off in the direction of the hot spring town, urging the woman to follow him. Was Red Shirt too brazen to admit it? Or was he too cowardly to face me? It seemed I wasn't the only one who found this town too small. Chapter 8. After the fishing trip with Red Shirt, I started to distrust Red Tornado. When he told me to move out of my lodgings, I thought he was a jerk. But then, at the faculty meeting, he surprised me by advocating for harsh punishment for the students. The landlady told me he'd confronted Red Shirt on Unripe's behalf, which made me think he was a decent guy after all. Maybe Red Shirt was the villain, manipulating me with his subtle hints and insinuations. Then I saw him walking with Madonna on the riverbank, and I was convinced he was a scoundrel. I didn't know what kind of scoundrel he was, but he was definitely not a good guy. He was two-faced. I liked people who were straightforward, like Bamboo. Straightforward people were easier to fight. Red Shirt, with his soft voice, his feigned kindness, his intellectual pretensions, and his amber pipe, was difficult to read. I wouldn't be able to have a fair fight with him. I'd prefer Red Tornado's bluntness and his booming voice, even if it meant being glared at. He might have seemed intimidating at the faculty meeting, but his glare was better than Red Shirt's oily, insincere voice. I'd actually considered making amends with Red Tornado after the meeting, but he just glared at me, so I gave up. Since then, Red Tornado had refused to speak to me. The 1.5 sen I'd returned remained on his desk, gathering dust. I couldn't touch it, and he wouldn't take it back. Those 1.5 sen had become a wall between us. I couldn't speak to him, and he wouldn't speak to me. We were cursed by 1.5 sen. I started to dread seeing those coins on his desk every day. In contrast to my strained relationship with Red Tornado, my relationship with Red Shirt remained cordial. The day after our encounter on the riverbank, he came up to me at school. "How's your new place? Would you like to go fishing for Russian literature again?" he asked. I wanted to confront him, so I said, "We met twice yesterday, didn't we?" "Twice. At the station. Do you always leave for the hot springs so late?" "It's dangerous." "We also met on the Nozeri riverbank," I said pointedly. "No, I didn't. I went straight home after the hot springs," he lied. Why bother lying when I'd clearly seen him? What a liar. If he could be a vice principal, then I could be the president of a university. I stopped trusting him completely. I wouldn't talk to Red Shirt, whom I distrusted, and I wouldn't talk to Red Tornado, whom I admired but who wouldn't talk to me. The world was a strange place. One afternoon, Red Shirt said, "I need to talk to you. Come to my place." I reluctantly agreed, skipping my daily trip to the hot springs. Red Shirt lived alone, but being a vice principal, he had a nice place with a proper entrance. The rent was 9 yen and 50 sen. If I could live in a place like this for $9.50, I might as well bring Kyo here. Red Shirt's younger brother, who was one of my worst students, answered the door. He was a crafty kid, worse than any country bumpkin. He gave me a look that said, "You again?" I'd visit 2 times, 3 times, even in the middle of the night, if I had to. I wasn't there to pay my respects. I was there to return his ill-gotten gains. "He has a visitor," the brother said. "I just need a moment," I said. "I can talk to him at the entrance." He led me inside. I saw a pair of worn-out, low wooden clogs near the entrance. I heard a voice from inside the house saying, "Wonderful. Wonderful. It must be no good. No one else would make such high-pitched noises and wear such tacky clogs." Red Shirt came to the entrance with a lamp. "Come in. It's just you, Shikoku," he said. "It's all right. I can talk to you here." Red Shirt's face was flushed, like he'd been drinking. He and No Good must have been having a party. "About my raise, I've changed my mind. I don't want it." Red Shirt held the lamp closer to my face and stared at me, speechless. He was probably shocked that anyone would refuse a raise. Or maybe he was surprised that I'd changed my mind so quickly. Or maybe it was a combination of both. He just stood there, his mouth agape. I agreed to the raise because I thought Koga was leaving voluntarily. He is leaving voluntarily. No, he isn't. He wants to stay. He'd rather stay here on his current salary. Did Koga tell you this? No, then who did? My landlady. She heard it from Koga's mother. So, you heard it from your landlady? Yes. With all due respect, that's hearsay. You're saying you believe your landlady over me, the vice principal. Is that a correct interpretation? I was in a difficult position. Literature graduates were good with words. They could twist anything to their advantage. My father often told me I was too impulsive. He was right. I'd rushed over here without confirming the story with Unripe or his mother. I was caught off guard. I couldn't back down now. I'd already decided not to trust Red Shirt. My landlady might be stingy and greedy, but she was honest. She wasn't two-faced like Red Shirt. "What you say might be true," I said, "but I don't want the raise. I've made up my mind." "That's even stranger. You came here to refuse the raise because you thought it was unfair, but now that I've explained the situation, you're still refusing? I don't understand." "You don't have to understand. I'm refusing. If you insist, I won't force you. But changing your mind so suddenly, without a valid reason, will damage your credibility." "I don't care about my credibility. That's not a good attitude. Credibility is important. Even if your landlady, it wasn't the landlord, it was the landlady. Fine, the landlady. Even if what she told you is true, your raise isn't coming directly from Koga's salary. Koga is going to Nobioka. His replacement will be paid less than him. The difference will be added to your salary. You don't have to feel bad for anyone. Koga will be promoted in Nobioka. The new teacher will be paid less because that was the initial agreement. And you'll get a raise. It's a win-win situation. If you still don't want it, that's fine. But why don't you think it over?" I wasn't very smart. Normally, I'd be swayed by such a logical argument. Maybe I'm wrong, I'd think, and back down. But not tonight. I didn't trust Red Shirt. No matter how eloquent or logical he was, I wouldn't be swayed. "What you say makes sense, but I don't want the raise. I've made up my mind. It won't change. Goodbye." I turned and walked out. The Milky Way stretched across the sky. Chapter 9. The morning of Unripe's farewell party, Red Tornado came up to me at school. "About the other day, at the inn," he began. "The landlord came to see me and said you were causing trouble and he wanted you to leave. So I told you to move out. But I heard later that he's a con artist who sells forged paintings and antiques. He was probably lying about you. He probably tried to sell you his junk, and when you refused, he made up a story to get rid of you. I apologize for misjudging you." I didn't say anything. I picked up the 1.5 sen from his desk and put them in my wallet. "You're taking it?" he asked, surprised. "Yes. I didn't want to be indebted to you, so I tried to return it. But I've changed my mind. I don't mind being indebted to you after all. He laughed. Ahahaha. Then why didn't you take it back sooner? I was going to, but it felt strange. I've been dreading seeing those coins on your desk every day. You're stubborn, he said. You're even more stubborn, I retorted. Where are you from? He asked. Tokyo. Tokyo? That explains your stubbornness. And you? Aizu. Aizu. That explains your stubbornness. Are you going to the farewell party tonight? Of course. I'm even planning to see Unripe off at the harbor. Farewell parties are fun. You should come. I'm going to drink a lot. Go ahead. I'll have some snacks and then leave. Only idiots drink alcohol. You're quick to pick a fight. A typical frivolous Tokyoite. Whatever. Come to my place before the party. I need to talk to you. Red Tornado came to my lodgings as promised. I'd been feeling sorry for Unripe. Now that he was leaving, I felt even worse. I wanted to give a speech at the party, to send him off in style, but I knew my rough Tokyo dialect wouldn't be appropriate. So I asked Red Tornado, with his booming voice, to give a speech instead, to put Red Shirt in his place. That I started by telling Red Tornado about the Madonna incident. He already knew the details. That jerk, I said, after recounting my encounter with Red Shirt on the riverbank. You call everyone a jerk. You called me a jerk at school today, Red Tornado said. If I'm a jerk, then Red Shirt is too. But I'm not like him. I'm not like that spineless idiot. He might be spineless, Red Tornado agreed. He might be tough, but he wasn't very articulate. People from Aizu were all like that. I told him about the raise incident and Red Shirt's promise of a promotion. Red Tornado snorted. He's planning to get rid of me, he said. Get rid of you? Do you think you'll be fired? No way. If I go down, I'm taking him with me, he declared. How do you plan to do that? I haven't thought that far ahead yet. He was tough, but not very bright. He was happy when I told him I'd refused the raise. That's my Tokyoite friend. Good for you, he praised me. I asked him why he hadn't tried to convince Unripe to stay. By the time I heard about it, it was already too late. I talked to the principal twice and Red Shirt once, but they wouldn't budge, he explained. Koga is too nice. He should have refused outright or at least said he needed time to think. But he was swayed by Red Shirt's smooth talk and agreed immediately. By the time his mother came to me crying, it was too late. Red Shirt is behind all this, I said. He's trying to get rid of Unripe so he can have Madonna all to himself. Definitely. He's a sneaky bastard. He puts on a kind face, then stabs you in the back. And if you confront him, he'll deny everything or distract you with nonsense about Russian literature or haiku. He's a coward. He's probably the reincarnation of a lady-in-waiting. Or maybe his father was a pimp in Yoshiwara. What's a Yoshiwara? Someone who's not manly. That part isn't cooked yet. You'll get tapeworms if you eat it like that. It's fine. So, Red Shirt goes to Kadoya Inn in the hot spring town to meet his geisha. Kadoya? The inn. It's an inn and a restaurant. The best way to expose him is to catch him red-handed with the geisha. Catch him? Are you going to stake it out? Yes. There's an inn called Masuya across the street from Kadoya. I'm going to rent a room on the second floor, make a peephole in the shoji screen, and watch. Do you think he'll show up? He will. This isn't a one-night operation. I'm prepared to stake it out for 2 weeks. That's dedication. I stayed up all night for a week when my father was dying, and I was exhausted for days afterward. I don't mind being exhausted. This is for the greater good. I'm doing this for Japan. Good for you. I'll help you. I'm not good at planning, but I'm a good fighter. We were discussing our plan to expose Red Shirt when the landlady came in. A student is here to see Mr. Hotter. He went to your house, but you weren't there, so he came here looking for you. Red Tornado went to the entrance. He returned a moment later. He wants us to come to the festival. They have a special dance troupe from Kochi performing tonight. He says it's a rare opportunity and we should see it. He was eager for me to join him. I'd seen plenty of dances in Tokyo. Every year, during the Hashiman Shrine Festival, there were floats and dances in the streets. I'd seen everything from Shiokumi to whatever. I didn't want to see some silly country dance, but Red Tornado was so insistent, I agreed. It was Red Shirt's younger brother who'd come to invite him. What a strange coincidence. The festival grounds were decorated with banners and flags, like a sumo tournament at Ikoin Temple or a memorial service at Honmonji Temple. They'd even borrowed flags from all over the world. Ropes and wires crisscrossed the sky, making it look unusually festive. A makeshift stage had been erected in the east corner for the Kochi dance troupe. To the right of the stage was a bamboo enclosure with flower arrangements on display. People were admiring them, but I didn't see what the big deal was. If they liked bending grass and bamboo so much, they should marry a dandy or a cripple. Fireworks were being set off on the opposite side of the grounds. A hot air balloon emerged from the fireworks, carrying a banner that read, "Long live the Empire." It floated over the pine trees and landed inside the army barracks. Then, with a bang, a black ball shot up into the sky, exploded above our heads, and a puff of blue smoke spread out like an umbrella, drifting lazily in the air. Another hot air balloon rose, this one with a red banner that read, "Long live the Army and Navy." It floated towards Aioi village, probably landing somewhere near the Cannon Temple. The crowd was much larger than at the ceremony this morning. It was surprising how many people lived in this rural area. There weren't many intelligent-looking faces, but there were certainly a lot of them. The Kochi dance finally began. I'd expected something elegant, like a traditional Japanese dance, but I was wrong. A group of men in hakama and headbands, each carrying a drawn sword, lined up on stage in 3 rows of 10. One man stood apart from the others, at the edge of the stage. He was also wearing hakama, but instead of a headband and a sword, he had a large drum strapped to his chest, like a taiko drum. He started singing in a strange, unfamiliar melody, beating the drum rhythmically. The melody was languid, like watered-down molasses, but the drumbeats gave it a distinct rhythm. The 30 swords flashed in unison, their movements swift and precise. It was mesmerizing and slightly terrifying. Each man was only 1.5 feet away from the others, and they were all wielding sharp swords. A single misstep could result in serious injury. They weren't just standing still, moving their swords back and forth. They stomped their feet, turned sideways, spun around, and bent their knees, all in perfect synchronization. If one person was even a second off, someone could lose a nose or an ear. Their movements were free-flowing, yet confined to a 1.5 foot square space, and they had to move in the same direction and at the same speed as everyone else. It was far more impressive than any dance I'd seen in Tokyo. I was told this dance required years of practice. The most difficult part was the drumming, which dictated the rhythm and movements of the 30 dancers. The drummer might have seemed relaxed, singing in his languid voice, but he had the most important and demanding role. Red Tornado and I were completely engrossed in the dance when suddenly a war cry erupted from the crowd. The calm, orderly spectators turned into a swirling mass of bodies. "Fight! Fight!" people were shouting. Red Shirt's younger brother emerged from the chaos. "Teachers! Another fight! The middle school students are getting revenge. They're fighting the normal school students again. Come quickly." He disappeared back into the crowd. "Those brats. Can't they just behave?" Red Tornado muttered, pushing his way through the crowd. He was going to try to stop the fight. I followed him. I wasn't going to run away. We reached the scene of the fight. It was chaos. 50 or 60 normal school students were fighting with about 70 middle school students. The normal school students were wearing their uniforms, while the middle school students, having changed after the ceremony, were mostly in Japanese clothing, so it was easy to tell them apart. But they were so entangled, it was impossible to separate them. Red Tornado looked around, perplexed. "This is bad. If the police arrive, we'll be in trouble. We have to stop them." He looked at me. I didn't reply. I jumped into the thick of the fight. "Stop! Stop! This is disgraceful. Stop fighting!" I yelled, trying to push my way through to the front, where the fighting was most intense. But it was impossible. I'd barely moved a few feet when I was trapped. I saw a large normal school student grappling with 15 or 16 middle school students. I grabbed the normal school student's shoulder and tried to pull him away, when someone tripped me from behind. I lost my balance and fell. Someone stepped on my back. I pushed myself up with my hands and knees. The person who'd stepped on me stumbled and fell to my right. I saw Red Tornado in the distance, his large frame wedged between students. "Stop! Stop fighting," he was yelling, but no one was listening. "This is hopeless," I shouted, but he couldn't hear me. A rock whizzed past my ear and hit my cheekbone. Then someone hit me on the back with a stick. "Hit him! Hit the teachers," someone yelled. There were 2 teachers, one tall and one short. "Throw rocks," someone shouted. "Don't be ridiculous, you country bumpkins," I yelled, headbutting the nearest normal school student. Another rock flew at me, grazing my head and landing behind me. I couldn't see Red Tornado. I'd come to stop the fight, but I wasn't going to back down after being attacked. Who did they think I was? I might be small, but I knew how to fight. "You brats!" I lashed out, punching and kicking. "Police! Police! Run!" someone yelled. The students scattered like cockroaches. Even country bumpkins knew how to retreat. They were better at it than Kuropatkin. I looked around for Red Tornado. He was wiping his nose, his formal hari torn to shreds. He'd been punched in the face and was bleeding profusely. His nose was swollen and red. I was wearing a casual kimono, which was now covered in mud, but at least it wasn't torn like Red Tornado's hari. My cheek was throbbing. "Your face is bleeding," Red Tornado said. 15 or 16 policemen arrived, but the students had already escaped. Red Tornado and I were the only ones left. We gave our names and explained what happened. "Come down to the station," the officer said. We went to the police station, gave our statements to the chief, and went home. Chapter 11. I woke up the next morning feeling sore all over. I hadn't been in a fight in a long time. This is pathetic, I thought, lying in bed. The landlady brought me a copy of the Shikoku Shinbun. I didn't feel like reading the news, but I forced myself to sit up and open the paper. I was shocked. There was an article about yesterday's fight. It wasn't surprising that the fight was reported, but what was written was outrageous. A middle school teacher, Hotta, and a recently arrived, impertinent Tokyoite instigated and directed the students, and even assaulted normal school students, the article claimed. It went on to say, Kokura Middle School was once renowned for its well-behaved students, but these 2 delinquents have tarnished our reputation. We must hold them accountable. We trust that the authorities will take appropriate action before we are forced to take matters into our own hands. Every single word was emphasized with a black dot, as if they were branding us with a hot iron. "Damn you!" I yelled, jumping out of bed. The pain in my joints vanished instantly. I crumpled the newspaper and threw it into the garden. Then I picked it up and threw it into the outhouse. Newspapers were full of lies. They were the biggest liars in the world. They twisted everything to their advantage. Impertinent Tokyoite? I had a name. And a family tree that went back to Toda Mitsunaka. I washed my face. My cheek stung. "Did you see the newspaper?" the landlady asked. I read it and threw it in the outhouse. "You can retrieve it if you want," I said. She looked startled and left. I looked in the mirror. The cut on my cheek was still there. This was my face. I wouldn't let them call me an impertinent Tokyoite and get away with it. I couldn't skip school just because I was upset about the newspaper article. That would be embarrassing. I ate breakfast and went to school. Everyone was staring at me and laughing. What's so funny? I thought. This isn't your face. Nogood came up to me. You were quite the hero yesterday. A badge of honor, that wound. He was clearly mocking me for getting beaten up. Just shut up and lick your paintbrushes, I said. How rude. But I'm sure it hurts, doesn't it? Whether it hurts or not is none of your business, I snapped. He went back to his desk and started whispering and laughing with the history teacher. Red Tornado arrived. His nose was swollen and purple, like it was about to burst. It looked worse than my cheek. He and I sat at adjacent desks, right by the door, so our battered faces were on full display. Every time the other teachers got bored, they'd look at us and whisper and chuckle. Those idiots. I thought. They're probably thinking, look at those fools. When I went to class, the students greeted me with applause. A few of them even chanted, "Teacher, teacher." Were they cheering for me, or mocking me? Amidst all this attention, Red Shirt came up to me, as usual. "What an unfortunate incident. I'm so sorry. I've talked to the principal, and we're demanding a retraction from the newspaper." "Don't worry." He was practically apologizing. The principal came out of his office during the third period. "That newspaper article is causing quite a stir. I hope it doesn't become a problem," he said, looking concerned. I wasn't worried. If they were going to fire me, I'd resign first. But I didn't want to give the newspaper the satisfaction of driving me out. I had to clear my name. I decided to confront the newspaper editor after school, but the principal said they were already demanding a retraction, so I dropped it. "Red Shirt is suspicious," Red Tornado said as we were leaving school. "Be careful. He's dangerous." "He's always been suspicious," I said. "Don't you see? He set us up yesterday. He sent his brother to invite us to the festival, knowing there would be a fight. He wanted us to get involved. I hadn't thought of that." Red Tornado was more perceptive than I'd given him credit for. He orchestrated the fight and then leaked the story to the newspaper. What a schemer. The newspaper too? That's shocking. But would the newspaper really listen to him? Of course. He probably has friends at the newspaper. Or even if he doesn't, all he has to do is make up a story, and they'll print it. That's awful. If he really did that, we could be fired. We might be fired, Red Tornado agreed. Then I'm resigning tomorrow and going back to Tokyo. I refuse to stay in this awful place. Even if you resign, it won't affect Red Shirt. That's true. How can we get back at him? He's too clever. He covers his tracks, so it's hard to prove anything. So, we're just supposed to accept the blame? That's not fair. There's no justice in this world. Let's wait and see. If things get worse, we'll have to deal with him directly. You mean, physically? Yes. We'll find his weak spot and exploit it. All right. I'm not good at planning, so I'll leave it to you. But I'm ready for anything. We parted ways. If Red Shirt had really done what Red Tornado suspected, he was a truly despicable person. I couldn't beat him with brains, so I'd have to beat him with brawn. No wonder there were so many wars in the world. In the end, it always came down to brute force. The next day, I eagerly opened the newspaper. No retraction, not even a correction. I went to school and complained to the principal. "They'll print it tomorrow," he said. The next day, a small retraction, in 6-point font, appeared in the newspaper. But there was no apology or correction. I complained to the principal again. "There's nothing more we can do," he said. "Whether it's true or not, there's nothing we can do about it. You have to accept it." He was giving me a sermon, that raccoon-faced, frock-coat-wearing, spineless principal. I was so angry, I said, "Then I'll go talk to the editor myself." "No. You can't. If you do, they'll just write more bad things about you. Just let it go," he pleaded. So, there was nothing we could do about being slandered by the newspaper. It was like being bitten by a snapping turtle. You couldn't fight back. I learned that valuable lesson from Raccoon today. A few days later, Red Tornado stormed into the staff room. "The time has come. I'm putting my plan into action. I'm in," I said. But Red Tornado hesitated. "Maybe you should stay out of this," he said. "Why? Did the principal ask you to resign?" "No." "Did he ask you?" "Yes. He called me to his office today and asked me to resign." "That's outrageous. Raccoon must have been hitting the sake too hard." "We went to the festival together. We watched the dance together. We tried to stop the fight together. If he wants us to resign, he should ask both of us. It's Red Shirt's doing. He knows we can't stand each other, but he thinks you're harmless." "Harmless? I can't stand him either. You're too naive. He thinks he can manipulate you. The nerve. As if I'd let him. He's also delaying the arrival of Koga's replacement. If he fires both of us at the same time, there will be no one to teach math. So, he's using me as a temporary replacement. That bastard. I won't let him get away with this." The next day, I went to the principal's office. "Why didn't you ask me to resign?" I demanded. Huh? Raccoon blinked at me, dumbfounded. Why did you ask Hotter to resign but not me? Is there a law that says only he has to resign? It's a matter of school policy. That policy is wrong. If I don't have to resign, then neither does Hotter. I can't explain the details, but Hotter has to resign, but you don't. What a slippery raccoon. He just kept repeating vague excuses. Then I'll resign too. Do you think I can just sit here while Hotter loses his job? I'm not heartless. But we need you. If both of you resign, there will be no one to teach math. I don't care. Don't be selfish. You have to consider the school's situation, and resigning after only a month will look bad on your resume. Think about your future. I don't care about my resume. Loyalty is more important than a resume. That's true, but you have to understand my position too. If you insist on resigning, you can, but please stay until we find a replacement. Think it over. He had a point. I didn't want to be the reason the school had no math teacher. And Raccoon looked so pathetic, his face turning red and blue, that I agreed to think it over. I didn't say a word to Red Shirt. I'd deal with both of them at the same time. I told Red Tornado about my conversation with the principal. That's what I expected, he said. Don't submit your resignation yet. Wait and see. I decided to follow his advice. He seemed smarter than me. Red Tornado submitted his resignation and said goodbye to the other teachers. He went to Minatoya Inn, then secretly returned and hid in a room on the second floor of Masuya Inn, across the street from Kadoya. He'd made a peephole in the shoji screen and was staking out Kadoya, waiting for Red Shirt to arrive with his geisha. I was the only one who knew about his plan. Red Shirt would only come at night, after 9 o'clock, when the students and other teachers had left. I helped Red Tornado with the stakeout for the first 2 nights, but we didn't see Red Shirt. On the third night, we waited from 9 until 10:30, but he didn't show up. I wasn't going to stay up all night for nothing. After a few days, my landlady started to get concerned. You have a wife, you know. You shouldn't be staying out so late, she said. This isn't just staying out late, I thought. This is divine retribution. But even divine retribution got boring after a while. After a week of fruitless stakeouts, I was starting to lose interest. I was impatient by nature. I could be very dedicated when I was motivated, but my enthusiasm never lasted. By the 6th day, I was getting bored. By the 7th day, I was ready to quit. But Red Tornado was persistent. He'd be at his post from dusk until past midnight, his eye glued to the peephole, watching the gas lamp outside Kadoya. How many guests are there tonight? How many are staying overnight? How many women? He'd ask, when I arrived. He was keeping meticulous records. It was impressive. I don't think he's coming, I said. He'll come, Red Tornado insisted, folding his arms and sighing. I felt sorry for him. If Red Shirt didn't show up, Red Tornado's plan would fail. On the 8th day, I left my lodgings at 7 o'clock, went to the hot springs, and then bought 8 eggs. This was my countermeasure against the landlady's sweet potato and tofu torture. I put 4 eggs in each sleeve of my kimono, draped my red towel over my shoulder, put my hands in my pockets, and climbed the stairs to Red Tornado's room at Masuya Inn. Good news, he exclaimed, his face beaming. He'd been looking gloomy for the past few days, but now he was full of energy. Good news? I asked, already excited. Kosuzu, the geisha, arrived at Kadoya at 7:30. With Red Shirt. No, then it's no use. There were 2 geishas, but it's promising. Why? He's a sneaky bastard. He might have sent the geishas ahead and he'll sneak in later. Maybe. It's almost 9 o'clock. 9:12, Red Tornado said, checking his nickel pocket watch. Turn off the lamp. 2 heads silhouetted against the shoji screen will look suspicious. A fox would be wary. I blew out the kerosene lamp on the desk. The starlight faintly illuminated the shoji screen. The moon hadn't risen yet. We peered through the peephole, holding our breath. The grandfather clock chimed 9:30. Do you think he'll come? If he doesn't come tonight, I'm giving up, Red Tornado said. I'll keep going as long as I have money. How much do you have left? I've spent 5 yen and 60 sen on 8 nights of stakeouts. I pay the inn every night, just in case I have to leave suddenly. That's smart. The innkeeper must be wondering what you're up to. I don't care about the innkeeper. I just want to catch that bastard. You're taking naps during the day, right? Yes, but I can't go out, so it's frustrating. Divine retribution is hard work. It would be a shame if he didn't show up after all this effort. He'll come. Look. Look, he whispered. A man in a black hat walked past Kadoya, glancing at the gas lamp. It wasn't him. Oh well, I thought. The clock chimed 10. Another night wasted, the town was quiet. The sound of drums from the red light district was clear and distinct. The moon rose above the mountains, illuminating the streets. I heard voices approaching. I couldn't look out the window, so I couldn't see who it was, but they were getting closer. I heard the clatter of wooden clogs. I caught a glimpse of 2 figures in the moonlight. It's safe now. I've taken care of the obstacle, No Good said. All bark and no bite, Red Shirt replied. He's just like you. All bluster and no brains. Quite amusing, actually. He wants a raise, then he wants to resign. He must be crazy. I wanted to jump out the window and punch them both, but I restrained myself. They laughed, ha 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 ha, and entered Kadoya. Hey. They're here. Finally. I can finally relax. That no good bastard called me all bluster and no brains. He called me an obstacle. The nerve. We had to intercept them on their way back. But we didn't know when they'd leave. Red Tornado had told the innkeeper he might have to leave suddenly in the middle of the night. It was surprising the innkeeper had agreed. Most people would have assumed he was a burglar. Waiting for them to leave was torture. I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't keep staring through the peephole. I was restless. I'd never felt so anxious in my life. I suggested we just barge into Kadoya and confront them, but Red Tornado refused. If we barge in now, they'll just call us troublemakers and throw us out. If we ask to see them, they'll say they're not there or hide them in another room. Even if we do find them, how are we supposed to know which room they're in? We have to wait. He was right. We waited until 5 in the morning. As soon as we saw their shadows emerge from Kadoya, we followed them. The first train wasn't until later, so they had to walk back to the castle town. Once they were outside the hot spring town, they walked through a cedar grove, then past rice paddies and thatched roof houses, and finally reached the riverbank path that led to the castle town. We could confront them anywhere outside the town, but we decided to wait until they reached the cedar grove, where there were no houses. We quickened our pace and caught up to them easily. They turned around, startled. Wait! Red Tornado yelled, grabbing Red Shirt's shoulder. No Good tried to run, but I blocked his path. Why did you spend the night at Kadoya with a geisha? Red Tornado demanded. Is there a rule against vice principals staying at inns with geishas? Red Shirt replied calmly. His face was pale. You lecture everyone about propriety, about not going to soba shops or dango shops, and then you spend the night at an inn with a geisha. No Good was still trying to escape, so I stepped in front of him. What did you mean by all bluster and no brains? I yelled. I wasn't talking about you. Honest, he said, his face a mask of innocence. I realized I was still clutching the eggs in my sleeves. I'd been holding them tightly because they were dangling precariously as I ran. I reached into my sleeve, pulled out 2 eggs, and threw them at No Good's face. Take that. The eggs splattered, covering his face in yolk. He yelped, stumbled backward, and fell on his butt. Help, he cried. I hadn't bought the eggs to throw at him. I'd bought them to eat. But I was so angry, I'd thrown them without thinking. Seeing him sprawled on the ground, covered in yolk, I felt a surge of satisfaction. You little punk! I yelled, pulling out the remaining 6 eggs and pelting him with them. His face was now completely yellow. While I was busy with No Good, Red Tornado was still interrogating Red Shirt. Do you have any proof that I spent the night at the inn with a geisha? Red Shirt asked. We saw Kosuzu enter Kadoya last night. Don't try to deny it. I'm not denying anything. I spent the night at Kadoya with Yushikawa. I don't know why Kosuzu was there. Shut up. Red Tornado punched him in the face. Red shirt stumbled. That's assault. Violence is no way to resolve a dispute. I don't care. Red Tornado punched him again. You're a schemer. You only understand violence. He continued punching him. I joined in, kicking and punching no good. They both collapsed at the foot of a cedar tree, too dazed or injured to move enough. Or do you want more? Red Tornado yelled, landing a few more punches. Enough, they both cried. Are you sure? I asked no good. Yes. Enough. This is your punishment for being such scoundrels. Learn your lesson. No amount of smooth talk can excuse your behavior, Red Tornado declared. They both remained silent. They were probably too embarrassed to speak. I'm not running or hiding. I'll be at Minatoya Inn until 5 o'clock. If you have a problem, call the police, Red Tornado said. Me neither. I'll be with Hotta. Sue us if you want, I added. We walked away. I got back to my lodgings a little before 7. I started packing immediately. What's going on? The landlady asked, surprised. I'm going back to Tokyo to get my wife, I said. I paid my bill, went to the station, and took the train to the harbor. Red Tornado was sleeping in his room at Minatoya. I decided to write my resignation letter. I didn't know what to write, so I simply wrote, due to personal circumstances, I hereby submit my resignation and will be returning to Tokyo. Please acknowledge receipt of this letter. I addressed it to the principal and mailed it. The steamship was scheduled to depart at 6 o'clock that evening. Red Tornado and I were exhausted, so we slept until 2 in the afternoon. Did the police come? I asked the maid. No, she replied. They didn't sue us. We laughed that night. We left that wretched place. The farther the ship sailed from the shore, the better I felt. We took a direct train from Kobe to Tokyo. When we arrived at Shimbashi Station, I felt like I'd finally returned to civilization. I parted ways with Red Tornado there and haven't seen him since. I forgot to mention Kyo. When I arrived back in Tokyo, I went straight to her house, canvas bag in hand. Kyo. I'm back. Botchan. You're back so soon, she cried, tears streaming down her face. I was so happy to see her, I said. I'm not going back to the countryside. I'm staying in Tokyo with you. I found a job as a streetcar conductor through a broker. The salary was 25 yen a month, and the rent was 6 yen. Kyo was happy even though we didn't have a house with a grand entrance. Sadly, she died of pneumonia in February. The day before she died, she called me to her bedside. Botchan, she said, please bury me in your family temple when I die. I'll be waiting for you in the afterlife. So, Kyo's grave is at Ijinji Temple in Kobanata, April 1906.